Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the October 4th, 2011 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are agendas on both sides of the room. If you would like to pick one up and follow along with our proceedings tonight, I would encourage you to do so. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment on the items that we're going to be talking about tonight. It is customary for us to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so at this point in time I would ask all of you to please stand and join us in saying the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. And with that, I will ask our fine village clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner Schnell?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much, April. That brings us to item 3 on the agenda, which are the approval of the minutes from prior council meetings. We have 2 tonight. We have executive session for approval only of September 6, 2011, and council meeting minutes from September 20th, 2011. Do I have a motion? Well, let me first ask, are there any clarifications, corrections, changes, revisions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve as submitted?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. The minutes, both sets of minutes are approved as presented. That brings us to item 4. So you didn't have to wait very long at all. This is the period of the evening where we take public comments on general matters. These are matters that are not appearing on our agenda for discussion tonight. So if anyone has any matters of a general nature that they would like to address the council on, we would invite you to please come down to the podium, give us your name and address, and we'd love to hear from you. Any comments of a general nature? Any questions? We're going to have to come up with a geography quiz for Commissioner Neustadt next week, just so that there's something. All right? I'll give you a week's notice. All right, hearing none. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move to the consent agenda, which is item 6. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor Tully, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience with respect to the consent agenda? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The consent agenda has been approved unanimously. That brings us to our active agenda, item 7. And we have one item, although it is a doozy on our agenda tonight, on the active agenda, and that is the adoption of a comprehensive plan. Do I have a motion to adopt the new comprehensive plan for the Village of Downers Grove?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance adopting the comprehensive plan as presented.
Second. Questions or comments from the council on this item? Who wants to start? Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to reiterate what I said last week, I want to thank everybody who participated in putting the comp plan together from TCD3 through the Planning Commission. I spoke at length last week about a problem that I had with this particular plan. It was a change that the council made to it, so if you're interested in those comments, you may review the meeting from last week, the podcast, or the minutes, which are extensive, and they will reflect what I had said. And with that, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments on the comprehensive plan from any members of the council? Going once. Going twice. Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to the comprehensive plan? Going once, going twice. I will not reiterate what I said last week, but once again, I think all of us greatly and deeply appreciate all the effort that went into this outstanding piece of work product. It is truly the product of the community and is a long time in coming and is the reflection of a great deal of dedicated work by a lot of people. And I'm very glad, thinking back on the numerous occasions in which when I previously served as a commissioner on this council, of saying, where's the comprehensive plan? That we now have one. With that, I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Schnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Okay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The adoption of the comprehensive plan passes 6-1. That concludes our active agenda and brings us to item 8 on our agenda, which is the first reading. This is sort of the workshop portion of our meeting where we entertain items that are being presented for the first time for discussion, and they will be voted upon at a later date and time. We have 3 items tonight, so I will turn it over to the village manager to introduce each of these items.
And I will quickly turn it over to our village attorney, Enza, who will present both the first 2 items, which are liquor ordinance amendments.
Thank you. The first item is an ordinance prepared that's been amending the liquor code to allow a BYO, bring your own liquor license classification. So this would allow licensees to apply for a license that would allow patrons to come into the establishment and bring in their own beer or wine to consume on premises in conjunction with a meal prepared on premises and served by the waitstaff. The licensed establishment would still be required to comply with all other liquor license requirements, just like any other license holder. It would be limited to a bottle of wine per individual or 36 ounces of beer per individual, which is basically three bottles of beer, what it comes out to. They're able to charge a corkage fee if they so choose, so the wait staff would be in charge of the alcohol. And like other licensees, the initial licensee, if you have already a license classification, you can also apply for a BYO and have 2 licenses, both on-site premises where they would sell to you, or you could allow your patrons to come on and bring in their own beer or wine as well. This was reviewed by the Liquor Commission on September 8th, and it was approved and recommended for approval. We've had about 4 requests for this that are waiting for this type of license. We're recommending a $525 liquor license application fee.
Thank you. Questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Durkin.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As I was going through the documents, I didn't see any letters of recommendation or support of this through the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Corporation, or the Downtown Management Corporation. Is there any reason why?
We have been in contact. In fact, this came through a request through the legal department from Linda Kunze from the Downtown Management. Unfortunately, I got a call about 5 o'clock from Linda Kunze, who is not feeling well today, so she's not here. But we definitely had support from Linda Kunze, who actually was the promoter of this and who requested it. There were several businesses in the downtown that were requesting this license.
Is there any way we can get something for the file? I mean, I think it's
Sure.
imperative. We have these organizations, we have great partnerships with them, and I think this is where the real value of them come before us.
Okay.
So if we can do it, I mean, I wouldn't hold my vote up for it, but I would ask in the future going forward if we can get some sort, because I know with the Economic Development Corporation, with the parking garage, same thing. I just
Sure.
hope this isn't a pattern that we're starting. Not on staff side, but on their side,
Yeah.
thinking that they don't need to really do it except by phone call. The other question I have is you had answered some of it. You had talked about the number of bottles and the sizes and liters or whatever that an individual can come in. But if there's a group of 4 or 5 or 6 people, how do we control that? How do we know that, you know, if I bring in 3 beers and everybody up here brings in 3 beers, you know, pretty soon we're gonna have a party at the table, and we have stipulations on amount of service to the table, but how would that be controlled or monitored?
That would be through the licensed establishment. They would be required to monitor the over-service. They would have to be required, they're still going to be required to go through the Bassett certified training. So they would be trained in noticing the over-service and managing that, just like any other licensee. So that would be the control and what we would depend on them to look for.
And then, I'm sorry.
I'll say just the way it is now.
Exactly, just like any other establishment.
Yeah, but right now, if you order a beer, you get 1 beer. Right now, we're proposing you can bring in 3 beers, and you've got 4 people. We all do the math. We've got 12.
Well, you can order 3 or 4 beers too. And in fact, there's a financial incentive to serve those 3 or 4 beers. Where here there isn't, so there's probably an incentive for more control when you bring it in yourself.
Okay. All right, and then how would we monitor this? I mean, would we, like we do now, where we send an officer
Yes,
underage, or?
Well, we would still send in officers to do the monitoring. It would be a different type of testing that we would do. We would basically do a testing to make sure they comply with every term and condition of their specific ordinance, as opposed to the underage, because they wouldn't really be selling the alcohol to the underage, but they would still be required to card and make sure the over-service and still make sure that they're certified and the server is 19 years old, all the other requirements that come into this license.
All right, and then because there's more time-consuming management, monitoring of the program through the the police department, are our fees in line with this accordingly?
We did take that into consideration, the police officer's time in monitoring and inspecting these, into the $525 fee.
Okay, and currently there's 5 businesses that want this.
4.
There's 4 businesses
There's 4 businesses that have contacted us.
at $525.
Correct.
All right. And then our last question, I know I've taken up a lot of time here. The last question I have is there going to be a certain number of these that we're going to permit, or is it, if you want it, you can come get it?
Currently, we're proposing in the ordinance to limiting it to the 4. So if there are additional requests, we would come back to council to ask for that amendment to come back to increase that amount. But right now, we are asking to allow 4 of those licenses in the village.
Do we foresee anyone else out of the 4 that may be coming, or maybe it's better just to do 6 or 5 or whatever than, because I know time commitments on staff and council?
It was our intent to start with the 4 to see how it goes, and then to
Okay.
monitor it that way and
Okay,
to set that limit.
very good. That's all I have. I appreciate all your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schnell.
Just to delve in a little further, some of the things that Commissioner Durkin was talking about. One, there was a conspicuous lack of any comments at all by any of the business organizations, the chamber, and I know.
Maybe I should just interrupt and address that, because I
Okay.
actually have spoken with Laura Crawford on this very issue.
Laura just walked in.
Yeah, and so there wasn't a formal letter, and the reason for the lack of formal letters because the Chamber of Commerce was not asked to take a position by its membership.
Okay.
But I did make an inquiry to the Chamber of Commerce in case there was any position. And my understanding, there is no position just because they're not taking a position. It's
Okay.
not that,
Well,
it's either that or that.
It just, I guess, the concern question I had was if indeed it came forward from the downtown management. As a liquor commission, no one was at the liquor commission to speak in favor of this or whatever. So I understand what you're saying. It's just, I think I do agree with Commissioner Durkin in that I think in things like this, it would be interesting to have a letter saying we're not taking any position, we are da-da-da.
I can send you the email.
That would be good too. I think that's the kind of thing that we all would like to see.
I think
So-
we've gotten spoiled with that kind of response in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we have. I mean,
Right.
it would be beneficial to know if this is not just a downtown type of license, what the broad spectrum of the business community.
Well,
thinks
actually,
about
the first business to inquire into it isn't even located in the downtown.
Okay,
Right.
but that's the first thing. Okay.
It's over on Maple Avenue,
Okay.
actually.
The other thing that does concern me too, and I know you can obviously buy more than a bottle, but if everybody can bring a bottle of wine, consuming a bottle of wine a person is a lot of consumption by any standard. If people overindulge, or if it's difficult to control the overindulgence and somebody leaves and gets a DUI, is the establishment the one that's going to be responsible since they didn't sell the liquor, or is the individual going to be responsible for themselves?
The establishment would still be required to purchase dram shop insurance, so, I
So
mean,
they
they
would
would
be
be, they would be responsible. They would also be the individual. I mean,
That's not a lot
Would just
different than
depend.
today. You can order a bottle of wine at your table and just have one of the people drink it.
I guess
And
it
DUI
just,
notification doesn't really do anything to the licensee.
yes, it just seems, having used these kinds of BYOBs in Chicago, you bring a couple bottles, and maybe that will be the same thing, and we may just have to let it work itself out. It's just, I think by stating that each person can bring a bottle, it seems like an excessive amount from my perspective. So, but again, you're right, one person, you could buy 2 bottles, and one person
Right.
can consume 2, so, okay. And then, it seems like we have the same thoughts tonight, but as far as control buys, or however you want to, are we going to try to have a young party bring in their own bottles and see if they're allowed to consume? I mean, how is this going to work, and how is the control actually going to take place?
well, without getting into the specifics, there's going to be, it's a different technique that the police
Okay.
officers are going to use, only because we can't really send in a minor with alcohol.
Okay,
I mean, that's illegal.
okay, yeah.
So, I mean, there's going to be a different testing to make
Okay.
sure that they are in compliance with the ordinance.
Okay, all righty. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked a lot about enforcement already. I think that's one of the main components of any time we have a new liquor classification is trying to find those unique ways to enforce it. I know that our police department will work hard to come up with some sort of creative way to check on it. I think the question that I want to go back to Commissioner Durkin had is, say the 7 of us go up there and we all can bring in 3 beers, but I walk in with a case of beer. Technically, that's 3 too many. I mean, is that establishment then responsible to say, go get rid of those 3? That's
Yes.
technical.
That's one of the things we could test for and make sure that they're in compliance. If you walk in with 6 beers and they allow you to stay with the 6 beers, then that could be technically a violation because it's only allowed 36 ounces per individual.
And I'll talk to the number of 4. I think we've had some recent events that number might be allow for some extra use. One of the applicants may no longer be in business, or the proposed applicant. So I think that having 4 is a good start. It's a good starting point for us to monitor it, to see how it goes, to see if people are even really that interested to go through the whole process of filing for a liquor license, getting the insurance, getting the Bassett training. It is sort of a comprehensive process that needs to be undertaken in order to have this privilege of having the liquor service even though you're not providing it. So I think the use is, it's different from what we're used to in Downers Grove by far, but it is what I'll call a tool to let our residents and even some visitors come to Downers Grove who may not otherwise have decided to come to Downers Grove. So I'll be interested to see how many really do jump in and go for this license. And obviously, if we could keep a very close eye on it, and at any time that there is one, just maybe a quick report that we have 1, 2, 3, or 4 interested that are actually going through the process, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin.
Just as we're all talking, it kind of spurred some thoughts. So if someone brings in their 3 beers, is the restaurant going to chill them for them, or are they going to bring in a cooler? I mean, that's going to look kind of...
They can. It would be up to the individual establishment. I mean, they can charge a corkage fee if they so choose. They could charge. It would be up to them to establish how they would do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Slightly different tack. What I would like to see on here is, since this is a brand-new classification, I'd like to see establishments so licensed also be required to have a recorking service. State law allows people to, properly recork.
That isn't
to leave.
included.
But it isn't a requirement. They can do it, they can refuse to do it, and I think if you apply for the BYOB license, I think you should require the service. That's just my thought, so that when people bring in too much, everybody brings in their bottle of wine.
That actually is in the ordinance, proposed ordinance.
It says it's allowed. I don't know
It
if
says
it's...
patrons may not transport unsealed or open containers of wine from the licensed establishment except when resealed in accordance with state law.
Right.
They can't store it.
But what I'm saying is that the establishment be required to have that service when they provide. When we give them this license, they should be required to have that service. Right now it just seems to be optional. You can either drink it all there, and if you want to leave it, if the establishment has the ability to do it, they'll do it. What I'm suggesting is that they be required.
You want to require it.
To have that available.
So that's a really good idea.
Sure.
There's 2 things about it. One is it's another testing vehicle. You can go in and drink half and ask to be tested, but then you don't want anybody saying, I mean, this is a little stretch, but if we're trying to be as cautious as we can, a guy could go in there and know he's had enough, ask to have his bottle corked up, be told they don't have it, and then think, well, he ought to polish it off as long as he's here. And I think that's a good idea.
We can make that change.
Yeah, we can make that explicit.
And I was also looking at section 3.29, consumptions on premises. It seems that it jives, but then in a way it kind of doesn't, except as provided herein, and I don't know what provided herein, if it's the whole, all of our ordinances regarding this are just within this section. It shall be unlawful for anyone holding a liquor license under this chapter to allow customers to consume alcoholic beverages on the premises not purchased from the licensee unless the alcoholic liquor is provided and served by an off-site catering business. It just seems to me that we need to clean up the language a little bit, and maybe I have it wrong, but it just seems that we need to clean up the language. The other, let's see, same section. However, bottles of wine purchased on the premises in conjunction with a meal may be removed from on-premises consumption licensed establishments if properly resealed in accordance with state laws. So we covered the recorking situation. But, you know, in this section, if you don't buy it from the, you have to buy it from the establishment unless it's a catering license.
There is another provision in the ordinance that already allows BYO for a bottle of wine on a licensed establishment. That's what that's referring to. There's a section in our
the same-
current ordinance.
okay.
That's what it's referring to. We've already previously amended our liquor ordinance years
Back
ago
in
to
Yeah,
allow.
well, okay, it says
So that's-
however.
Yeah, I think,
It's in the next, it says under K, and that says, let's see, wine brought into the leased premises by a patron and not purchased from the licensee may be consumed on the premises so long as it's served and controlled by the
Correct.
licensee.
That's what that refers
So
to.
it's kind of a BYOB. So I don't know if
So
we
we
need,
previously, allowed that. That's what that refers to.
so I don't know if we need to do any cleaning up in 3.29 or not.
No, that's the section that it refers to, because it is allowed in that section. If you bring in a bottle of wine in a licensed premises, we would allow that already. We already allow it regardless of the ordinance before you tonight for a bottle of wine.
And not beer.
Correct. Just limited to wine.
So, okay, I'm just saying, just make sure 329 matches up is all. That was my concern. Thanks.
thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry to jump in on Bill there. These workshop things, I wish we had a different setup up here. I was going to point out that we do already have a certain amount of this going on in town. It was 2007 when we made that change. And I remember at the time some very similar questions and conversations. And if you think back to the last, say, 10, 12 years worth of changes in the Liquor Commission or the Liquor Code, we've kind of created an environment where we're trying to allow folks to do things. And I would argue that over the last 10 years or so, we haven't seen an appreciable difference in the sort of the common good or lack thereof of liquor service in the village of Downers Grove. What still remains true is that we are heavily dependent upon the licensees to behave appropriately. And so what it's incumbent on the Liquor Commission and frankly, Mayor and Liquor Commissioner to do is to really be strict when people misbehave. The fact is we've got, 90-some licensees, something like that, and you know, any problems we have, whether they're DUI notifications or controlled by failures or, you know, just general police call-outs, are limited to a really short list, and it's the same list, and it's not likely to be this list. I think we should go forward with this, but I think anytime we talk up here about liquor, we should keep reinforcing the fact that misbehavior ought to be dealt with really severely. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, just a few comments. I mean, first of all, why are we doing this? And the reason is very simple. It's because businesses asked for it. And in this economic environment, whether a business, particularly a restaurant, succeeds or fails can be on a very narrow margin. And there were some of our businesses here in town, restaurants who wanted to succeed, that asked whether this would be a possibility. And the first question that I asked myself as the local liquor commissioner is, well, what do other towns do? Of course, there are other towns that do this. The city of Chicago does it, although what we're proposing is very different than the city of Chicago. Let's just make that brutally clear. There are a lot of restrictions that we're proposing here that don't exist in the city of Chicago, but the concept of bring your own liquor, beer and wine to a restaurant is not a new one. Other towns do it. There's been a lot of press about Hinsdale lately, so we're not blazing new trails here. Although I think we're actually doing it in a much more conservative fashion than a lot of our peers, which is I think appropriate to Commissioner Barnett's point and to some of the questions asked by my colleagues. This is a new thing for Downers Grove, so I think we need to tread carefully, and I think it's entirely appropriate to put these types of restrictions on this and then see how it goes. But the purpose of it is the businesses asked for it in order to give them another tool by which to try to succeed. And of course, I think we all know that we'd like to see successful restaurants in Downers Grove, and that this is another tool, another option that will allow some restaurants to do better than they otherwise would, and it's an option available to them. Then I think that if we can responsibly give them that option, that we should at least pursue it, and that's what this is all about. So that's where this comes from. And then, the question was asked, where's downtown management stand on this? I think that was answered. I know Mr. Michael Casa would have been here himself, except he's doing what we're asking him to do at a trade show tonight, so otherwise he would be here to speak to it himself, although I'm not quite sure how economic development necessarily jives with this. And I did communicate, and I apologize for not sharing this with my colleagues, but I did communicate with Laura Crawford with respect to the Chamber's position, and just quite frankly, they haven't been asked to take a position by their membership, so they don't have one. It's not, I think, from any lack of interest. It's just, they have procedures like we have procedures. Let's leave it at that. And I think the questions that have been asked so far about how will this work are appropriate, because it is different. And yet, what I understand from reading the ordinance is almost all of the protections that are currently in place, as well as the risks that are currently in place with the other types of licenses, are more or less the same here. Obviously, over-service is something that we rely upon our licensees right now to monitor. They could sell somebody 10 beers and you could have the same problem. I think whether it's purchased or brought in is not the point. The point is, are they conducting themselves as responsible licensees? And you could see licensees that would actually take possession of whatever it is that's being brought in and then serve it to the folks. That would be one way to control it. So if someone were to come in with that case of beer might go in the back room and be brought out only on a one-at-a-time basis. There are a lot of things that licensees can do to demonstrate their responsibleness, and we are expecting them to do that. Because this is a test, and you're right. If we see some misbehavior, then we will effectuate the enforcement mechanisms that are available to us, including if we don't want to continue to have said license, that is an option that's available to us as well. And then I actually, the more I thought about it, I think Commissioner Waldak's point is a good one about transporting anything that's brought in, because I could see someone who brought in their own wine and wants to leave, and, well, wait a minute, this is the bottle of Chateau Le Bouffe that I got for graduation. I'm not going to leave it behind. It needs to be transported, so maybe perhaps making it mandatory that since they can't let it leave, that they should require that service, since it already exists in state law. That's probably a good idea. I think it was implicit, but making it explicit is probably a good idea. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes, and we've all got some time to think about it before it comes back again. Any questions or comments for any members of the audience with respect to the bring your own liquor license that's being proposed for certain businesses in the village? Hearing none. We'll move to the next item.
Great.
Which is also about liquor.
Yes, and the next item is an ordinance amending the PO2 liquor license to allow consumption of full alcohol on site. Currently, the PO2 liquor license is restricted to beer and wine only. There's only one of these licenses in the village, and that is the Lemon Tree Grocer. They have requested that they be allowed to sell full alcohol as opposed to beer and wine in order to complement their cafe service. And again, this item was before the Liquor Commission on September 8th, and they recommended approval. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you, Mayor. I haven't fully decided how I'm going to approach this yet. That's why we have workshops. And hopefully on this item and the previous one, I'd like to hear from the public as well. We seem to have gotten into this designer license mode where we design liquor classifications for individual businesses rather than general. And then when it used to be, I don't know how it is now, but it was kind of frowned upon to talk about a specific business. You're supposed to be talking about the classification and not vice versa. But somehow this just never really struck me right. I understand this will improve business for the Lemon Tree. And one should consider that if consumption of hard alcohol is important to a patron, there are also many establishments where they can quench that thirst. Another concern I have is the expanding availability of alcohol. that may be good for one business in particular, but stretches our enforcement resources by adding another establishment. Another item, interesting, that only, that the owner, when you read the minutes, they talk about, well, for example, you know, we like to do Bloody Marys in the morning kind of thing. Well, if that's all they really wanted to do, we could restrict it to having Bloody Marys between 8 and noon or some such, and I don't think that's what they're really after. They really wanted full service.
You're going to discriminate on the basis of liquor choice?
No, well, that was their justification.
Oh, whiskey drinkers.
When they bring in, they argue their reasoning for having their special license. That's the kind of things they bring up in the Liquor Commission, you know. Well, we want to be able to do this. Well, you know, we're going to give them a full service.
Sorry, that was just levity.
I know it was levity. But anyway, I don't know. I think having this designer classification really opens up the door to fairly allowing similar businesses to request, and on the basis of fairness, that they can do the same thing. You know, is this classification, is this really fair to Jewel, Dominick's, Ultra, any other grocery store? How long before Walmart and Target want liquor licenses so that they can serve in the store? And then why stop at grocery stores? Why not hardware stores? You know, you could throw a few beers back while you're looking at power tools. You know, and then you know, clothing stores. When Dad goes with Mom to go looking at clothes, you know, he can have a few while she's shopping for clothes, or vice versa. You know, when is all this going to stop? A year or two before I got on council, I was walking down Main Street in the early evening, and a car pulled up, and there was a group of people in there, and they wanted to know where the closest bar was, and I really had to think about it, and that was like 2 years before I got on council. Now you can tell them just get out of the car. You know, it's proliferated so much, and you know, all we ever really wanted in the downtown was a grocery store. We didn't get specific, so we got kind of a designer grocery store, and the Lemon Tree's a fabulous place. Well, all of a sudden, it's more than a grocery store. It's a place to eat. It's getting to be a little more of a restaurant, and now it's going to be a full-service bar. I don't know. At some point, you know, you want to be able to take the kids shopping and not have alcohol everywhere you go. And I'm really concerned about the proliferation and the purpose of this. And I think this just kind of continues down a slippery slope. So that's my thoughts on this tonight. I definitely hope to hear from the public on this as well, and my fellow commissioners as well. I always appreciate input, and that's why we have workshops, so we get this whole week, at least a whole week, to think about this and debate about this. So those are my concerns, and I turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, you know, Bill does, or Commissioner Waldeck does bring up a good point regarding this. Lemon Tree is a grocery store, right?
Correct.
And they're turning more so into a restaurant/bar now. And these designer liquor laws that we're creating, or licenses that we're creating, is this specifically, have they always been towards the Lemon Tree? Or have we...
This specific license was created for the Lemon Tree to allow both on-site packaged sales as well as on-site consumption. So it was a license created specifically to allow both.
And then what kind of fee are we charging for this? I mean, my gosh, your time, police time.
I'd have to get back to you. I don't know the fees off the top of my head. I'd have to get that to you.
I'm all for having them in business and continuing in business and finding their niche. But I mean, there's some valid points to what was just said, in my opinion, so.
Thank you. Commissioner Barnett.
This whole thing is, you know, some of this is going to sound repetitive from what I just said before. When we say designer licenses, there's sort of a connotation with that, not too dissimilar from saying something like McMansion. It's not that many years ago that you could stop in at Tracy's or Belamides, and you could have a cocktail and grab a six-pack to go at the local tavern, as was the case in thousands of places all over Chicago. if you want to take your kids to a grocery store, you're going to have a hard time taking them to one that doesn't have alcohol at least for sale. Most of the times you go through Jewel or Trader Joe's, they have samples out, particularly in the wine department. The question of accommodating people, it stops when we want it to stop. I mean, I guess I'm thinking this group up here would probably chuckle when Home Depot came to us asking for a liquor on-premise license consumption. Probably do the same thing with Hallmark, oh, but they're gone. Same as our grocery store of the past, and our drugstore of the past, and our hardware store of the past. What we're trying to do here is help folks, as the mayor said with the last classification discussion, survive and succeed within the scope of what we define as appropriate behavior. And so that's, again, back to where does it stop and what do we define? It's what the 7 people say. So we certainly could turn this down, but accepting it is no more a prerequisite for Home Depot serving alcohol than I don't even know what. I mean, that's just kind of a conversation that seems designed to generate some sort of response. And so I guess there's a little bit of one coming out, but it's about behavior. And I'm much less interested in whether somebody calls themselves a grocery store, calls themselves a bar, calls themselves a brewery. What I'm really interested in is that they're serving alcohol in a way that our residents and the folks that are making the rules think is appropriate. And I don't see any example, I see nothing yet out of our PO2 licensee to suggest that they would do anything other than that. And oh yeah, by the way, when they do, we can stop it instantly. So I'm supportive of this and think that we're looking for boogeymen where there aren't any if we're too worried about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Schnell.
Just one last question for Enza. Since in the proposed changes, it says that the main business, the primary business consists of the direct sale of it has to be a grocery store first and a restaurant second. How are we going to determine that that is indeed the case?
Every year at renewal time, they submit a form which outlines where their sales come from.
Okay, and so we would look at that.
We monitor that yearly on a renewal basis.
Okay, fine.
But that's not an audited form.
No.
Correct. And that was the problem I had. When if you sold food and liquor, you had to have, I forgot the number.
It was 40/60, yes.
40.
Which is a great law to have, but if you don't enforce it or audit it, what's the purpose of having it? So, I mean, why require it if it's not validated?
Is in a case like this where the primary part is supposed to be a grocery store, is there a way to have it more specific and more being able to be validated? My concern is that the line is going to be crossed between a grocery store and a restaurant. And, you know, we wanted it there as a grocery store. And I don't disagree that the cafe is great. You can sit there and, you know, have something to eat, and it's very nice. But we have other restaurants downtown who have different kinds of licenses and pay appropriately for them. And this one is specific to grocery store first and then a restaurant that's a little look there. Is there any way that we can make it more specific so that, I guess going to what Commissioner Durkin said, that there is a way to be fairly certain that the figures are as accurate as possible?
I mean, we can certainly request that they provide us the official state forms of what they report. I mean, we could dig deeper into their finances, I
Yeah, like a
suppose. I mean, right
financial
now, we just ask them to report out on a form. But, I mean, we certainly have that right. I mean, we can explore that. It's right now, I believe, is the only licensee that really has that.
Right, it's the only one that's like this.
Right.
And I guess it's just a concern. I mean, the idea was to have a grocery store downtown. And it's really nice to have a grocery store that has a cute cafe where you can go and, you know, have lunch or a little dinner or whatever. But, you know, do we want a really tiny grocery store with a really big cafe? And that wasn't the intention, right?
Well, the license, the way it's also set up, there is just a percentage that they can allow for that cafe in terms of size. So, I mean, from that standpoint, we do monitor that on a regular basis, in terms of inspections, how many seats they have.
But that was just expanded too.
It was
changed.
It was changed. I mean, that is, they are at full capacity right now as to what per ordinance and per license, per this specific license. So, from that standpoint, the ratio to cafe to the grocery store, it is in line with what the ordinance set out for them.
And
So,
I don't want to make work for you or for anybody, but if, in the week between now and when we vote on this next week, if there's a way that perhaps there could be more specifics as to how this could be verified without it being, you know, I'd like to think it through, and I'd like to have all the information available to make a good decision.
okay. We can look into it.
Okay, I mean, you know, not 20 hours, but just if there's a way, no more than 4, no more than 2. But no, I mean, if there's some way that we can, I guess, have a little bit more feeling that the numbers are as accurate as possible. And I'm not saying that they're not, it's just, this is a very unique situation. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin.
Well, I just wanted to say, you know, we're talking about how this is a unique license, but none of us have probably been to another place like Lemon Tree, so it has to be unique. I don't know of another grocery store that has a restaurant that has catering that, you know, that's all connected like that. So they don't really have Bobex?
The old Bobex used to do it.
Well, I've never been there. But I understand why it has to be the way it is, and I support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. I will support this also. I think, talking about broken records, Commissioner Barnett and I are going to sound the same. It's all about the enforcement. It's about letting the licensees know that we do have the ability to come in and check, and I think just asking them to give us their financial statements is important, and if those financial statements turn out to be wrong, then perhaps their whole liquor license can be removed. So, I mean, we have the authority and the ability, the Liquor Commissioner does, to wave a pretty mighty wand and determine what happens. Sword? You want a sword?
I don't carry a wand.
But I went back to the last item, and we do have a lot of different licenses. The first one on the list is Brew Pub. I mean, that's been one of our longstanding restaurants and operations in downtown Downers Grove. And without a specific license for that particular establishment, which has changed hands, we wouldn't be, it needs to be specific because they sell kegs of beer, they sell growlers. There's reasons why these licenses get specific, because of the people that are using them and the use that's coming out of those locations. So I'm fine with creating the licenses, drafting them around what the use is going to be, because I think it gives us the ability to put stricter and more precise restrictions on what we're asking these folks to do. And in this case, we're asking that this applicant have certain percentages of square footage and how much they sell and what they do. So I'll be in support of this. I think it's just like the last one, we have to watch them. We have to still be, you know, send in our officers, send in the police department, and just keep a very close eye on it. It is, I don't think anybody has said this yet, so I'm going to throw it out there. It is a privilege to serve alcohol in Downers Grove, and we do have the authority to remove that privilege if we feel like it's being abused. So, you know, that's a very important thing to remember as this group goes forward. So I will be interested to see about the financial information, to see what we can get for accuracy. But I do think that this organization has brought a lot to our downtown. It is something that people ask for. I've heard story after story about folks moving into the Acadia condos saying that they don't have a car. They try to use the train and they go downstairs for their groceries. That's the component that they had missed until that establishment was there. So that could have been any grocery store, but this is the one that's here. And I think working with them as a customer is a good way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, one last thought here. You know, it's not that we don't approve or support the Lemon Tree, but when Lemon Tree originally came before us, it was a grocery store. And then we tweaked it so they could have a cafe. And then we tweaked it so they could sell liquors. And then we tweaked it and we keep tweaking it and keep tweaking it. I guess the question is, how far do we continue to tweak with staff time and everything that's involved in doing so? I guess is a question I have. And, you know, I support Lemon Tree, I do. You know, I want to see them succeed. That's the given. And I know it's an instrumental part of our downtown, and I'm sure you're going to show something in the comprehensive plan. The question is,
Keep talking, he'll find it.
yeah, no, but the point is, they were approved for one thing, they're totally different than what they were when they originally came. Is it good, is it bad? I don't know, that's a debate we could have, and this is not the form to do it at, I'm not looking to do that. But I think the big question in the room right now is, this is what we approved, this is what we wanted, this is what everybody wanted, and now we got something totally different.
But to that point, Commissioner Durkin, you've got Park District Beer and Wine Catering, you've got recreational facility beer and wine. Those facilities were designed to be a rec center. There's a theater, there's the comedy club, the golf course. All these, even the Tivoli Theater, they all get specific in they need a use. So we do craft and form a license for the need. So in this case, it is working with the applicant to come up with the use that we are able to kind of instruct them in how we want them to perform as a licensee. So I get your point, but I just think that there are
But
other...
the financial wherewithal, the end result is, in those examples you gave, are not as close to 50-50 as we're seeing with the Lemon Tree. That's the key element. Almost 50% is liquor sales. The golf course, the Tivoli, all those, I'm sure it's 10%, 5%.
Well,
These applicants said 3-to-1 is their ratio. So
Lemon Tree is different today because they've asked and we've granted.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a unique thing, it's great.
yeah, we should be a little careful about, well, it's not what we all said it was going to be, only because we all allowed it to change. I mean, it's a process we certainly could say no to today, too, if we really thought that, no, that doesn't meet our picture of a grocery store. But so I mean, just make sure nobody acts or puts any tone out like somebody's trying to get away with something. This is an evolution this body's participated in.
Well, and the applicants when they were in front of the Liquor Commission, I think they mentioned that their business has been evolving and changing because they're trying to figure out what's going to work well for them.
Well, let me pick up there because that's a great segue. I'm sensing with both this discussion and the prior one, a little bit of sense of trepidation or fear, if you will, because something is new, it's different. And yet, we pride ourselves, the reason why I reached for the comprehensive plan is we pride ourselves on being innovative and creative and being facilitators, not regulators. Let me just go right out and say, first of all, enforcement, punishing bad behavior, you betcha. You betcha. We've got the power, I have that power, that goes without saying. So let's just get that off the table. If someone's misbehaving, not following our rules, they will pay the consequence, period. Now, let's talk about things that are innovative and creative and different, changing business models. Let's face it, folks, it's a very competitive environment. And there are a lot of businesses trying to do a lot of different things to try to succeed in our town. And we demand that and call for that and count on that every day. And so I think that within reason, let me say that again, within reason, we ought to do what we can to help facilitate that success. And again, compliance with the rules and good behavior is mandatory, period. But a couple of things that I have to take issue with is, when will it stop? How many places are we going to allow to have liquor licenses? Well, yeah, at some point in time, you can't have 1 million. But I don't know anybody in this room that would say if we had another 15 fine restaurants in Downers Grove that had liquor licenses, that anyone would object to that. You can pick up any piece of news in the blogosphere, and all we hear about is, why can't we get more restaurants? Why can't we get more restaurants? So I don't understand the hesitation of why, there's a movie quote that I want to come out here, is, are you afraid of success, man? Part of it is, within reason, we want to encourage the kind of economic success that our neighbors are doing everything they possibly can to take away from us. And if we're the ones that come up with something that's new and never been done before, why shouldn't it be in Downers Grove? So I don't think that we're designing a license so much as I think we're the government that's probably a few steps behind some creative businesses in town. So I think we actually have that flipped around. We're not designing, we're trying to catch up with some creative entrepreneurs is what we're trying to do. And I think Commissioner Neustadt hit it right on the, hit the nail right on the head. Let's go back 10 years. Brew Pub, that was new and scary when it first came around. And now it's a staple of the downtown. Actually having food and an alcoholic beverage on a sidewalk cafe, that was new and scary before that was approved. Now, we couldn't think of the downtown or anywhere else without it. Being able to have a glass of wine at a place like the Cellar Door, that was new and scary before that happened. The Tivoli has a liquor license. Oh, we can't have that in our town, can we? That was new and scary before that happened. Folks, we have a comedy club license because somebody came to us a number of years ago and asked to start up a comedy club. They never did, but that license still exists. Why? Because somebody wanted to establish a successful business in our town. That's why we came up with it. And we can go on and on and on. So whether it's Game Puzzle or it's the Lemon Tree, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, you betcha. If we think we can foster successful businesses in our town to serve our constituents and generate sales tax, again, within reason, in a compliance with our rules, I said at the outset, we expect good behavior and we insist upon it. And I'm a little bit surprised by the fear and trepidation. I'm not surprised by the questions during the last discussion about making sure that the right restrictions are in place and that we're proceeding carefully. With you 100% on that. I think that's our duty to do that in making sure that we're ensuring public safety. But just because it's new and different, I don't think we ought to treat it like the Frankenstein monster. No, those are my comments. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in. Be my guest. Commissioner Waldeck.
Be happy to jump in. No, I can see, and first off, I want to thank everybody up here for their comments. Like I said, I'm trying to keep an open mind on this and think about this for the week. And I understand, that's one part of the argument. You want successful business. A business say, in order to be successful, I have to sell liquor, so we let them do it, and we put restrictions on them, and we monitor, and we do all those wonderful things. But at the same time, we also represent a town, so, a village, a largely residential village. And part of the question is, do we really want to go down a road where we allow that kind of thing, where we allow that sort of thing?
What's that sort of thing, I guess is my question.
Well, a grocery store that turns into a cafe that does beer and wine.
What about a theater that has wine? What about, we can go on and on.
I say I understand your argument. I also understand that the public may be incensed because at some point, and in order to be fair, why can't Ultra? I mean, there was a time we had the Dominic's by us. They were serving sandwiches. They had a little corner there. You can go and get your sandwich, so you can buy meat in the deli and have. Well, now they want to do beer and wine. Okay, let's give them a full liquor license. Now all of a sudden, shopping in your village becomes you put the kids in the cart and you take them to the grocery store.
Well, except that's not their business model.
But if they wanted to, well, it originally wasn't their business model at Dominic's to go to be a deli section and a food counter, and then they decided that, well, yeah, that might be a good idea for business. Well, then, next could be a full-service bar, and all of a sudden you're into a point where we're putting the kids in the cart, and everywhere you take them, they're serving alcoholic beverages. Now, I'm granted, that's a slippery slope argument. Like I say, I understand your argument. I also want to understand what the people want. Do we give a business what it wants just because they request it and it brings in sales tax, or do we become a village where where you could have the hardware store and pound down a few while you're getting your power tools? So it's a matter of character.
It's a little hyperbole.
It's a matter of character. Well, it's the same thing as the designer licenses, and I can see both sides of the argument, and I want to try during the upcoming week to come down on the right side. And like I say, I understand your argument. I also understand a number of people who are very incensed over the fact that we changed the liquor sales on Sunday. So, it's a character of the village kind of thing. Do we want to go down that route? Are we going to stop here? Is it fair to give it to the Lemon Tree and maybe not Dominic's or Jewel?
Well, but that's really
fair.
That's really not that question in and of itself is not fair because there's no other applicant. So to suggest that someone is getting preferential treatment or being treated differently is a logical fallacy because there is nobody else to compare them to. I don't see Jewel and Dominic's lining up to make that request. If they did, they would be treated as fairly as anyone else.
The license has got, there's stuff beyond service tied with most of these licenses. There's square footage, there's individual freestanding buildings, there's hours of operation, there's a whole list of things. So Jewel is not going to be eligible for a PO2 license.
That's right, it's a designer license, so.
And one of the things about those unique licenses is that it allows us to, on an individual operational basis, set the expectations that we think the character of our village is appropriately reflected by doing. It allows us more, I would argue, more control to do exactly what Commissioner Waldeck's talking about, which is try and be cognizant of, responsible and reflective and respectful of the expectations of the village and what we want our environment here to be. That's what each one of those does. We can treat each one of those, whether it's the golf course or the Tivoli or package store or a restaurant, exactly the way, and try and dictate, or bad choice of words when you're legislating, but try and create a set of expectations for behavior that's unique to that operational entity. And I think that's a pretty good thing.
Mayor, I think too that by the applicants coming to us with these changes and modifications, they're hearing from our residents, they're hearing from their customers. There's a void, there's something that these folks want to come into this establishment, or they want to bring in to an establishment, the last item we just talked about. So as we change and modify these licenses and make new ones and create ones for theaters and comedy clubs and everything else and brew pubs, we're hearing from a segment of our community, through the business community, through their customers and residents and visitors that come to Downers Grove. So I do think that we are hearing from folks. We all hear from different people, we know that for sure, but in this case, businesses are listed on our organizational chart as part of our community, and we need to service them just as much as we do the residents and treat them with the respect that they asked for. And they asked for this license, and we're going through the process. Liquor Commission looked at it, now we are, so in my opinion, we are following through with our process.
Right, and Commissioner Waldeck's point is that the issue is now squarely on the table. Not quite sure exactly what the issue is, but if there's a large outcry over this kind of issue, presumably we'll hear about it.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, it's a workshop. We're workshopping.
I know, we need to get to the stormwater though.
That's nowhere near as fun as liquor.
That's true. Unfortunately, we're not serving it.
We don't serve here.
And not response, but in line with what you were saying, I don't have a problem with adjusting business models. I have a problem with adjusting it to the point where we no longer have a grocery store downtown, but we have another restaurant. And
that's a related but different issue.
okay, well, no, but it's related to the figures that I was asking to try to get a better handle on, because I think we need to make sure that as business models are tweaked, if you want to use that term, that the primary purpose of the business, which in this case was to bring a grocery store downtown, is maintained. So, and that's my only concern in all of this. I mean, to be honest, if we have a Bloody Mary bar or someone has a glass of wine, our police department will make sure that it's done responsibly, and hopefully our residents will do it responsibly too. But we have a grocery store down there, and I want to make sure it is a grocery store first. And if we have a cafe where you can get a glass of wine, you can get a Bloody Mary in the morning, fine. But we have to make sure that those figures actually jive, and that the primary purpose of the establishment is a grocery store, because that's what our residents told us they wanted in that space. So, anyway.
No disagreement with that. All right, now it's time to actually hear from the public. Any questions or comments on this item?
It's an idea.
It's a big chance. Please, ma'am, come on down to the microphone and give us your name and address. We'd love to hear from you. I have to ask you to do that because there are folks at home that are going to be listening to this on a podcast, and they're also watching it on television, and they can't hear you from their seat. So we appreciate you coming down.
My name is Linda Alsick, and actually I'm here for the stormwater, not this, but this is the first time I've come to Village Hall. Linda Alsick, 828 Clyde Avenue, Downers Grove, Illinois, 60516, 1928. I think in terms of this ordinance, passing it is going to allow a mother to send her child to buy a gallon of milk in a bar. I think you have to see what kind of image is that, because that's what's going to turn into if you're selling hard liquor at any time during the day. My mom used to send me out a lot of times to do shopping. It's the same thing. The kid is going to be sent into a bar. So I think you have to consider that. You want innovation, but you want to send a kid into the bar to buy a gallon of milk. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, ma'am. Any other questions or comments from the audience on this item? Hearing none. What do we we have one late entrant.
I was just debating on whether I wanted to vocalize a lot of my emotions here about this particular subject. My name is Sean Black.
Yes, thank you.
I'm at 911 West Rogers. I'm also the owner of Lemon Tree Grocer, one of the two actually, 5101 Mokel. So I live here and I have a business here. So a couple of things I just wanted to address. One was the comment about us not being focused on being a grocery store. I'll just tell you right now, when Tim and I first started this business a year ago, we had an idea of what we wanted to do. We had a passion, but I think we didn't completely know which way it was going to go. If you came into our store a year ago, you would have seen wine stacks next to the registers. You would have seen wine stacks all over, frankly, 2 or 3 other places in the store. We don't have that anymore. We have 3,000 more groceries than we had when we started. Our produce section is, I'd say, twice as big as it was before. Our deli is fuller. Our meat case is always full. Our seafood is full. We have sushi every day, made fresh. We've expanded our restaurant, yes. The reason why? Because we couldn't have survived if we hadn't. And I just want to tell you guys, no real just grocery store is going to survive in your downtown. I can tell you that because I own one in your downtown. And it just doesn't work. We don't have the size of a Whole Foods or a Jewel or a Dominick's. We can't carry all the products they can. What makes us different than them? Well, we have to be unique. We have to have great customer service. We have to listen to our customers, and when they ask for things and it makes sense for the business, then that's what we do. And that's why we're here in front of you guys, not because we're asking, we don't want to be special. We want to have a business that works. And quite frankly, we haven't hit a break-even point. We're very close, but if we don't continue to be innovative, we're going to go out of business, and you're not going to have a grocery store here. I'm just being honest. So I guess that's it. There's some other things. I think I'm happy to get you the liquor numbers. I provided those for Carol. I didn't realize it would be so closely scrutinized, or else I would have given you exact figures. I think they're actually less than what I told you. But yeah, we're a grocery store, guys. We're called Lemon Tree Grocer. So any of you that haven't been in, should come check it out. I promise you we really are a grocery store. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Any other questions or comments from the audience on this item? All right, hearing none, we'll now move to item 3 on our first reading agenda, which is not about liquor, but it is about liquids. This is the next installment in the village's ongoing investigation of a potential stormwater utility. And pick it back up with our village manager.
Yes, this is the 3rd installment out of 4 regarding our consideration of a stormwater utility. And keeping in our tradition, I will invite David Hyder from MFSG, Municipal and Financial Services Group, to walk us through this presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I am happy to say that I'm not talking about liquor this evening.
Oh, you may want to be.
That's right. We might make this more interesting if we had some liquor while we were going through it. But what we're going to go through this evening is we're mainly going to talk about the stormwater fee analysis. We're going to focus in on looking at what the rate base, the fee structure, the credits, the actual stormwater fees, and then once we look at the actual stormwater fees, what the fee impact would be to property owners, and then we want to do some benchmarking and compare what others in the state of Illinois have done with stormwater utilities related to the fees. Just a reminder in terms of where we've been and where we're going. We've had 2 workshops already. Workshop 1 was a policy overview background that occurred in early August. Our second workshop was in September 13th. We looked at the level of service and the magnitude of fee, really zeroing in on what it costs to provide the current level of service that you provide today, as well as our recommended level of service, what your revenues are in comparison to that currently. What we're going to focus on tonight, as I mentioned, is the stormwater fee analysis. And then our 4th workshop, which will be in 2 weeks, the 3rd meeting in October, will be our recommendations. So we're going to jump right into the stormwater fee analysis. And just to start off, I want to mention what the goal of the stormwater fee is. And really the main goal is to equitably assess the cost of providing stormwater service to property owners based on their impact to the stormwater system. So the 2 key things there are that we want to equitably allocate those costs of providing the service to those that cause you to incur those costs or that have the impact on the stormwater system. And to meet that goal, we need to look at two items. We need to first look at what's our unit of measure for the fee, which we term the rate base, and then also how do you impose that fee? What's the structure that you'd use? So first off, zeroing in on the rate base, there's various rate bases that are used to develop stormwater fees. Some typical approaches would be to use impervious area of the property. You could use impervious area plus pervious area. You can use the total area of the property or intensity of development. There's some kind of off-the-wall ones. Water usage is sometimes used. But typically, the basis for the rate base that's chosen is often dependent upon the availability of data. And the use of impervious area is by far the industry practice, the industry best practice, the most common approach. Primarily because it's the impervious area that relates directly to the runoff and the demand on the system, or the impact that a property owner has on the stormwater system. Impervious area is easily measured and verified. We know how much pavement's on a property, how much roof space there is, sidewalks, things of that sort. It's been upheld in the courts numerous times in terms of a defensible base for a fee. And fortunately, impervious area is readily available for all parcels in the village. We have the impervious area for every single parcel in the village, and we know what it is. So we do have the data, so this would be the recommended approach would be to use impervious area. Some examples, here's a residential property in the village. You can see the aerial here. This is the impervious area on this residential property. So it's any impervious area, any area where water can't penetrate would be considered impervious. Another example here would be a non-residential large parking lot within the village. So it's all impervious. And another example, commercial property that has a parking lot as well as a big roof space, the impervious would be shown there. So looking at the big picture of impervious and the number of parcels that you have and how much impervious area you have by class within the village, you can look at these two pie charts. The pie chart on the left shows the number of parcels by class within the village, those that are tax exempt, those that are industrial, commercial, and residential. You can see residential make up almost 74% of the total parcels. Next largest would be commercial at 23%. Industrial is a small in terms of number of parcels, and then tax exempt. Now the important part is over to the right, which shows the actual impervious area measured for all of the parcels by each of these property classes. So as on the left, the largest number of parcels is residential, but they also make up the largest piece of impervious, but it's not nearly close to 74%, it's about 47%. Whereas and then commercial makes up about 36% of the impervious, industrial makes up about 8.4%, and tax exempt makes up about 8.4%. So that's the actual impervious area by each of these property classes within the village. Now if we zoom in a little bit further and look at the single-family residential properties, since this is the largest number of parcels that you have within the village, this is a distribution histogram of the number of properties and how much impervious area is on each of these properties. So it actually gives you a nice bell-shaped curve. You can see the largest number of properties have about 3,000 to 3,500 square feet of impervious. And then your distribution goes out from there. There's some properties that don't have any impervious that would be considered vacant. And then there's some at the other extreme that have a very significant, larger than 7,000 square feet of impervious. That's the distribution there. So rate base is what we propose using as the basis that defines the measure for the stormwater fee. And the rate structure defines really how that fee is imposed. So the two different types of classes that are typically represented within a stormwater fee would be single-family residential parcels. And there's a number of ways to structure the fee for those. You could go through and actually measure each parcel by parcel and have a different stormwater fee for every single-family residential property. You could take an average of all those properties, which would be about 3,300 square feet of impervious, and say we're going to charge everybody one equivalent runoff unit. That's a fairly common approach, so everybody would pay the same stormwater fee if you're single family. Or you could do a tiered ERU approach, which would be to take the averages within the distribution we looked at, and you could have small ERUs, medium ERUs, and large ERUs to give a little bit more equity in terms of the allocation based on impervious. And then those that are not single-family are typically handled on a property-by-property basis, but measured as equivalents of residential ERUs. So I'll get into that in more detail, but our recommended approach and what we think warrants more examination is to use the tiered ERU approach within the village, as well as the parcel-by-parcel analysis for non-residential. We did go through this analysis with staff and went back and forth, and this was the approach that we think makes most sense. So if we zero in on that a little bit, again, here's the distribution for single-family residential impervious. And if we look at putting it into a small parcel, medium parcel, and a large parcel, this is what we think is a fair and equitable distribution. So that the small parcel would be any residential property that's single-family that has anywhere from 1 to 2,500 square feet of impervious. They would be considered 0.75 of an ERU. That class makes up about 13% of the total single-family residential. Then where the majority of your property owners fall in the single-family categories in the medium parcels, the 2,500 to 4,000 square feet, it's about 60% of them, they would be considered 1 ERU. And then large parcels would be above 4,000 square feet of impervious, up to 7,000. They would be considered 1.5 ERUs, and that makes up about 28%. Just had a thought jump into my mind. In terms of the ERUs, that's essentially, we'll get into it more, but that's the basis that's used for charge for the fee. So if you're 1 ERU, you'd pay a certain fee. If you're 0.75 of an ERU, you'd pay 0.75 of the fee. So that's really the basis there. So again, what that looks like for single-family residential. Again, you have a small, medium, large parcel. You can see the bounds that we've set on those for impervious. Again, they would be 0.75, 1 ERU, and 1.5 ERU. It should be noted that you could have a redevelopment take place that would turn a small parcel into a large parcel if you had an add-on or a redevelopment. So that's why we think it's important to have that distribution and not just use the average. We think that it provides more equity in that sense. So that's the single-family residential. Here's an example again of that same parcel. When we actually look at the measurements of impervious on this parcel, it's 3,500 square feet of impervious. So they would fall into the medium or 1 ERU. So they would be charged 1 ERU for their stormwater fee. Then as we move forward, I mentioned we would look at non-residential, all non-single-family residential parcels. And the approach there is to take the average single-family ERU, which is 3,300 square feet, and then to use multiples of that for every single non-residential property. So an example here would be to take a property that has 2,900 square feet of impervious, it's non-residential, you divide that by the 3,300 square feet, so this individual parcel would be 9 ERUs. So there is equity there. Each individual non-residential property would be measured. And typically you want to do that because there's a greater distribution of ERUs. You can have an extremely large commercial property and a very small commercial property, so it's more difficult to put them into the averages. And we'll look at that in a minute. So the way this would play out, again, with our example from before, this is a non-residential parcel, the parking lot. The total impervious area of that parking lot is 59,000 square feet. So using our approach would turn that parking lot into 18 ERUs. So they would pay 18 times the stormwater fee that we're going to present because of the area of their parcel. Another example here of the non-residential parcel, total impervious area of 32,500 square feet, which turns into 10 ERUs. So again, they would be charged 10 times the stormwater fee. So shifting gears a little bit, we need to talk about credits because that impacts the stormwater fee because that's potential revenue that we wouldn't be collecting, that we would be reducing the fee by, and we need to factor that in before we talk about the fee. Essentially what a stormwater credit is it's a fee against it's a credit against the fee. That's a reduction on the property in return for on-site stormwater management. So the credit does recognize that the on-site stormwater management may reduce the village's stormwater expenditures. And ideally, the credits encourage property owners to proactively manage stormwater on their site. This is one of the key benefits of a credit program, and it's one of the key benefits of a stormwater utility and having a fee, is that we want to encourage people to do something about the stormwater on their property. And often a fee brings that to the forefront, and credits recognize that people are taking those steps. I could spend a half an hour talking about the various credit programs that we've developed and that are commonly put in place, but I have a high-level view here of a typical credit program. Typically, credits fall into three types of control activities. Those that would handle volume control, so the actual quantity of water coming off a property. Control activity that handles the quality of water coming off the property, so it may take out sediments and things like that. And then direct discharge. If there's a discharge of stormwater that doesn't go into the village system, it goes outside of the village limits, there's often a credit for that. So some examples of these control activities. For volume control, you can have detention basins, rainwater harvesting, such as rain barrels, green roofs, things of that sort. And the typical range of credits for those types of activities would be anywhere from 5 to 30% reduction on the stormwater fee. Water quality examples would be rain gardens, permeable pavement, best management practices, and again, typically about 5 to 30% reduction on the stormwater fee, depending upon the volume and the quality of control for the stormwater. And then direct discharge, the portion of the property that may discharge outside of the village, you again would get a credit for that. We would recommend, and what's very common, is that you do not have a credit program that would allow somebody to totally mitigate their fee. There's a fixed cost of providing the stormwater throughout the village that everybody benefits from. There may be a rain event where normally you can handle all the stormwater, but we still need to be ready to receive it. So typically you'd set the maximum credit limit at 50%. A little bit of administration, typically you'd have a credit application be required, as well as an application fee, so this is taken seriously. The fees typically range anywhere from $100 to $200. And so if you think about it from a perspective of, depending on how high the fee is, it may not make sense for somebody to actually apply for the credit. And the reason is to keep the administration down. We do want these to be serious, on-site mitigation that really does reduce the volume and increase the quality of the stormwater. So you do want it to be taken seriously, and that's typically the reason for that level of fee. Some control activities, some examples here. You have a rain garden up on the left in a residential area, some pervious pavement, green roof, and then some best management practices within a parking lot. So there's some typical examples just to put some pictures with the words. Okay, so we've established the level of service. Last time we looked at the expenditures. And now we've just talked about the fact that we may reduce the revenues by offering some credits. So to get our total revenue requirements, and this is the calculation of the fee, we need to add together the level of service and the reduction in revenues. Once we've defined that, we would divide by our rate base, or our billable units, which we've talked about, and that ultimately gives us a stormwater fee. So I'm going to go through real quick, again, our total revenue requirement. This is the level of service from last time. The expenditures that were identified, your current revenues at $2.5 million. The current stated level of service in fiscal year 13 would be about $3.4 million, 3.3. And then the recommended level of service was $5.7 million. Based upon the estimated reduction in revenues, you can see the range that we estimate that you would essentially be giving up in reduction in the fee. So that gives us, we need to add that in, that gives us our total revenue requirement, $2.6, $3.5, and $6 million for each of the levels of service. So now we're at a point where we can actually calculate the fee. We've identified, again, the current, if we were just going to replace the current revenues, it'd be $2.6 million factoring in the credits. So applying that structure that I talked about with a single-family residential, where you'd have a small parcel, medium, and large, the fee would be $480, and this is per month, 640, and 960. And that's the 0.75, the 1 ERU, and the 1.5 ERU. And then a non-residential would be charged based on a per ERU basis of impervious that they have. So the 1 ERU times 10 if you're 10 ERUs. Next level of service, to meet the current stated level of service at the 3.5, you can see the fee would be 640, 850, 1280, and then 850 again for a non-residential on a per ERU basis. And lastly, at the recommended level of service, obviously the fee is higher, the 1080, 1440, 2160, and then 1440 for all non-residential. So that's what the fee looks like to meet each of those levels of service. In terms of the revenue collection disallocation, we wanted to remind you again of what we looked at last time in terms of where you currently collect your revenues. So the pie chart on the left represents where your current revenues for stormwater come from. Since it's on assessed value and property tax basis, about 76% of your revenues for stormwater come from residential customers. About 21% come from commercial, about 3% from industrial, and then because they're tax exempt, they don't pay any property taxes, tax exempt don't contribute currently. If we move to the stormwater fee revenue allocation, which looks at impervious, you can see that the distribution shifts fairly dramatically. But this one slide is, really the crux and the culmination of all of the discussions in terms of the reason why you would potentially go to a stormwater fee. Because if you remember, our goal is to equitably assess those costs based upon the impact that people have on the stormwater system. And if I have more impervious, I'm impacting the stormwater system more, and that's what the stormwater fee does. So the tax exempt that currently don't pay anything, they are certainly having an impact on your stormwater system. And under the stormwater fee approach, the equitable allocation would be shown there in the pie to the right. That's a very important concept to understand. Want to move now and show you what the impact to the property owners would be. So we have some examples. First, at the current revenues, if we're just replacing the current revenues, obviously the residential single family would pay based on the small, medium, and large, what I showed earlier. The average church, which would be considered a tax exempt, has about 18 ERUs, so they would pay about $115 per month towards stormwater. The large hospital in the village is 235 ERUs, they'd pay $752. And the university, which has 278 ERUs, would pay close to $900. Based on the on-site mitigation, both at the hospital and the university, we estimate that they would both receive close to the maximum credit of 50%, so that we have factored that in. If we look at the current stated level of service, we're looking at the higher fees. So the church goes to $153, hospital goes to about $1,000, then you're looking at about $1,200 for the university. And then finally, at the recommended level of service, you can see that the monthly bills are obviously higher, about $260, $1,700, and about $2,000 for the university. So we wanted to move it even a little bit further and try to address, I think this was one of the issues that was brought up last time, is and try to do a comparison of how revenues are collected today. Because I wanted to reemphasize that I mentioned last time that the stormwater fee is not the reason for these costs. I'm sorry, the stormwater utility is not the reason for these costs and these enhanced levels, recommended levels of service, but rather they're coming at you and you have to fund them one way or another. A stormwater fee and a stormwater utility is just one way to do that. You could keep your current approach and fund it with property taxes. But it's important to note that it's not because we're considering the stormwater utility that these increased costs or these increased funding levels are being examined. You're going to have to address them. You're on a 220-year replacement cycle of your stormwater mains right now, and that's not sustainable. So the funding needs to be there. So let me take you through this. What this shows is for the average residential property, which would be 1 ERU, again, their monthly stormwater fee, $640 under the current revenues, $850 under the stated level of service, and then recommended level of service $14.40. Now, if we attempt to collect the stormwater costs through the property tax, as you currently do, and we assume that the average single-family home is a $300,000 assessed value, this is what they would pay under the current approach. So to meet your current stated level of service on a monthly basis, a single-family residential with a $300,000 assessed value would pay $1,232. Under the recommended, they'd pay $20.81. And you can see the difference there between the stormwater fee and the property tax. We also did the exact same thing looking at some commercial properties. So this is at 2000 Butterfield Road. The assessed value of this property is $7.7 million. What they would pay based on the stormwater fee, since they are 139 ERUs, would be $890 under the current revenues. To meet the current stated level of service, it would be about $1,200 and about $2,000 at the recommended level of service. Unfortunately, this property doesn't have any stormwater mitigation on its site, so they would not be eligible for the credit. Based on the current approach of assessed value, you can see that what they would pay if we tried to continue to collect it through the property tax fee, through the property tax, and you can see the difference there. We then did the same thing with a commercial example at 1245 through 9 at Ogden Avenue. Their assessed value is about $500,000. They're 7 ERUs. They would pay more under the stormwater fee. And then lastly, property at 1212 75 Street, commercial example. They're 120 ERUs. They would also pay more under the stormwater fee. It should be mentioned, though, that these are the 3 examples that we have. If you're a commercial property that doesn't have a lot of impervious, such as a several-story building that has little impervious but a high assessed value, you actually would see a reduction in your stormwater, your contribution to stormwater. So those with high assessed values, a little low impervious, there would be a shift there. So I don't want it to make it look like all commercial are going to pay more. There are some, depending on how the assessed value works out, that would pay less. And lastly, we're going to talk about some benchmarking, just give you some examples of how other utilities in the state of Illinois that have stormwater utilities have structured their fee structures. So you can see the localities. The vast majority, in terms of their rate base, use impervious area. There's a few. Freeport does a flat fee by property type. So if you're commercial, it's one fee. If you're industrial, it's another fee. It's just it's not tied to the actual area of the property. Rock Island does gross area, and Tinley Park actually uses water use. In terms of the fee structure, you can see it's a blend of some use a flat fee per parcel or an average ERU. Some do the tiered ERU approach that we're recommending. And then for non-residential, it's most typically done on a multiple of ERU, as we're recommending that each property is looked at, the impervious, and then it's treated as a multiple of the ERUs. So what we're recommending is within the norm to use impervious, to use a tiered approach for residential, and to use a multiple of ERUs for non-residential. And then lastly, wanted to talk a little bit about exemptions and credits. All of the utilities that have stormwater fees in the state of Illinois don't exempt any property class, so they don't exempt tax exempt or any other property class. Everybody pays the fee in all these localities, and you can see that some offer credits and some don't. Those that do offer credits, it's typically, as I mentioned, based on the quantity of runoff, the water quality, and then whether it's direct discharge. Lastly, where the fees fall out, as I mentioned, I think this is in the first workshop, there are some utilities, about 7 of the total, that use a stormwater fee as well as other revenue sources. So those that are blue here use both a stormwater fee as well as property taxes or other revenue streams to fund their utility. They're not fully self-supporting. Those that are red do fund their utility with a stormwater fee. And you can see the monthly fee for an average single-family home and how the distribution is laid out. It's important to note that stormwater in the city of Moline is a lot different than in the village in terms of the layout and the cost of handling stormwater, so it's hard to compare them. It's not necessarily an apples-to-apples basis. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions. We've covered a lot of information.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and those 37 slides, excuse me, actually cover quite a bit of ground, including things that you've addressed before, but this is a cumulative exercise, so we'll necessarily be talking about some of those issues. I think what you've proposed in terms of how a stormwater utility would work, there are a lot of different pieces. You can move around the board, you can play with that, tweak this and whatnot, but for the most part, it's a pretty good approach in terms of trying to tailor it to the parcels and yet maintain equity and simplicity so that you're not burning up a lot of revenue in terms of managing the program. So that's good. To me, this really goes back, and this is the big question. It goes back to the policy issue, and of all the slides you showed, there's probably 3 that really matter. If we can go to 24, I actually got all the right numbers here. I think it bears repeating what you said earlier, is that looking at the utility or not looking at the utility does not change one concrete fact, and that is we have a gap.
Yep.
We have a gap between our revenues right now from available sources and what we're currently doing to try to maintain our stormwater system. We could stop this conversation about a stormwater utility right now. That slide doesn't go away. We have a gap, and we have to address it somehow. We're not even talking about the recommended level of service. That's what, and that's not a Cadillac level of service, folks. That's what we ought to be doing. That's sort of, the right way for our community, which just makes the gap get bigger. And so this slide is very important. This is why we're even having this conversation. There is a gap that needs to be filled. So we could do a number of things. We could, number one, do absolutely nothing, just not maintain our stormwater systems. That's an option. Actually, it's not, because then we'd be violating federal law, so I guess to some degree we can't even do that. Clean Water Act. But that would be an option, do nothing. Number 2 would be to pay for the gap through property taxes or sales taxes, or we could raise all kinds of things and close that gap. We could do that if that's what people want. Another one would be to address it through a stormwater utility, like what we're talking about and how that would work. And because this is something that's new and not been done, as they say, in these here parts, we're going through the details of how it would work. And I guess there's always another option, which is something else. And I'm all ears if there is a something else that hasn't been brought to our attention. But the question of whether you do, you close assuming we're going to close the gap, and we're not just going to do nothing and violate federal law. How do you close the gap? Do you do it with property taxes and raising other taxes? Or do you do it with the stormwater utility? Well, that then comes down to a comparison between, I think it's slide 11 and slide 26, which it's too bad they're not side by side, because there's a very, very telling graphic there. And let's just make sure that I understand this correctly, and I'm not misstating this, but if you look at slide 11.
Slide 11.
Yeah, start with 11.
They're going to look very similar because it's based on impervious.
There's a big difference.
Yep.
26 is the closer. 11 is the one to start off with. And the pie chart on the left is interesting, but for our conversation, completely irrelevant. The one on the right is the important one, because we're talking about total impervious area. That's how much property is generating stormwater runoff. If you're not generating stormwater runoff, you're not a problem. Well, you still have to contribute a little bit because we have systems, but it's the impervious area. That percentage right there, about 46, what is that, 46.97%,
Yep.
say 47% of the impervious area in the Village of Downers Grove is residential. Okay, keep that in mind. Residential properties make up 47% of the impervious area. Okay, keep that in mind. Now let's go to 26. Bless you. Yet those same residential properties, if you look on the left side of this chart, this is slide 26, that pie chart, Even though the residential properties only make up 47% of the impervious area in our village, they are currently paying 76% of the cost of maintaining our stormwater systems. That's the most telling two slides of this entire presentation. You want to talk about equity, why are the residential properties that only make up 46%, 47% of the total impervious area shouldering 76% of the cost? If we continue to go forward, how we've been paying for this in the past, property taxes, other kind of, well, mostly property taxes, that gap, that burden that the residential properties have been carrying is only going to increase. So we can keep going down the route of raising property taxes. That just means the residential properties are going to be carrying even more of the burden than they already are. It's already out of whack. And why is that important? Because we're talking about stormwater. It falls from the sky. We can't stop it. We're mandated by federal law to take care of certain parts of it no matter what. And it's kind of like the flip side of water. People pay for water based on their usage. You drink more water, you pay for more of it. You use less water, you pay for less of it. You have to have some kind of revenue to pay for at least the maintenance of the system to even have a water system. But after that, it's basically on a pay-as-you-go basis. Stormwater is kind of the opposite. You're not paying for water you use, you're paying to get rid of water that's running off of your property. And the more it runs off your property, the more you ought to pay. That seems to make perfect sense. But those two charts, 11 and 26, comparing it, just goes to show that the property tax system or way of paying for this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not very equitable because you've got one group who's paying a lot more on a percentage-wise basis than another group. And increasing property taxes and other things to pay for this is only going to increase that inequity. But we could do that. I just want to point that out because I think that's very important. And then what was it, slide 29, I know you went through it just to show if you did this switch from property tax funding to stormwater utility funding, that there would be some change in the property tax burden for an individual property on average. And that would be because of this shift, this shift to spread out more based on who's contributing to the runoff as opposed to right now it's the value of the property, and there's some people aren't paying anything because they're tax exempt from property taxes. But other than that interesting little illustration, I hate that slide because the stormwater utility funding approach has absolutely nothing to do with the value of a property. So to say that, oh, a house that's worth $300,000 is going to pay X, that's comparing apples and oranges. Your house could be worth $1 million and have no impervious space, and you would be paying almost nothing. Or you could have a house that was worth $500 and you have a parking lot of all asphalt, and you're generating lots of impervious space. You're creating impervious area, and you're generating a lot of runoff. Although, for simplicity's sake, you've gone through the analysis to come up with, what are the parcels like based on their actual impervious area, and then trying to come up with this tiered approach, the ERUs. Because otherwise it gets to be, you're individually calculating every parcel in town, and then you're coming up with all these administrative costs that would end up eating into the whole purpose of doing this. So anyway, I want to make sure I'm getting that right, because that was the message that was just screaming off the screen to me in terms of the policy level discussion. But let me ask one question. You raised an interesting point about, let's say somebody who's in that first tier, that first ERU tier, does a remodel or an addition or something like that. How is it contemplated that we're going to monitor changes in terms of, obviously if somebody does some retention on site, they're going to be motivated to come to us and bring it to our attention in order to get the credit. I get that. There's a self-reporting mechanism there. But let's say somebody does an addition and now they've created more impervious space. Is that going to be through the building permit process? So we're going to know, and then we're going to put them in, if it puts them in a new tier?
Yes, absolutely. We already report that way. There'd be no change in administrative process. The GIS system from which this impervious area data comes from is already updated when building permits are taken out and work is complete.
So there wouldn't be any new monitoring. We wouldn't have to do a sweep every 5 years.
That's the beauty of our GIS system that's already in place.
All right, so whenever somebody comes in and they double their square footage and their impervious space, if it kicks them into another tier, they would automatically start paying.
Correct. And of course, we would alert them to that when they applied for a building permit, so they would understand the potential impacts if we had this system.
Okay. The only other question I have, and this goes back to tweaking the details. But clearly, I understand the concept of charging somebody a fee for applying to get the credit. But I think there's also something we're trying to encourage there, going back to our comprehensive plan in terms of sustainability and green. And so we got to think about how to balance that, because I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from doing something that would actually improve the system and help their neighbors and help our community. I get the administrative aspect to it, but I would want to think long and hard about making that a barrier, because that's actually behavior we want to encourage.
Yeah, I've seen some. You can tailor that program, obviously, where if it is a commercial property and if you have to verify the best management practices are in there and you have to look at engineering drawings and things like that, it could be a significant amount of staff time. And so ideally, you'd structure that so that the fee would cover for those costs. There are utilities that have they waive the fee for residential properties that have rain barrels and things like that, although the discount or the credit is fairly minimal, because it really doesn't have a rain barrel. It does some volume control, but you really can't capture that much rainfall.
Right.
That's part of the issue.
Right.
Yeah, you can tailor that, and that's
well, just
something
because
you have to go through.
that's just behavior and trends that we'd like to encourage.
Sure.
The other question I had is, just to make sure that it's reiterated, somebody might ask me, wait a minute, let's say I put in a giant underground tank in my yard, not a rain barrel, I'm talking a giant tank that actually collects all my rainwater from my gutters, and I have zero discharge from my property, or close to zero discharge. Why should I have to pay a stormwater fee? And the reason why we're capping the credit, which is an awkward way of putting it, but limiting the amount of the credit and there being some amount of a fee, is because there's still a cost of maintaining the system generally, no different than the cost of maintaining roads and streets and things like that, which everybody has to kick in some amount to. It's like our water bills right now. If you shut your water off, not shut it off, but if you are a water subscriber and you don't use any water for a month, you're still going to get a bill, because there's a system-wide maintenance cost that everyone has to at least contribute, pay some minimal amount, and that's the concept we're talking about here in capping the credits.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there are utilities that offer 100% credit, but the vast majority, and our recommendation would be that you cap it, because there is a shared benefit. That person doesn't have flooding in the street in front of their house because you're handling the stormwater on the streets. Right. So everybody benefits from
Although,
that.
again, there's something that we could tweak if we thought from a community development standpoint there was a value to encouraging certain behavior, either commercial or residential. That's something you could play around with, too.
Sure.
It actually creates a whole new bucket of incentives. That's an interesting thought. All right, I'm sorry, I've been monopolizing the time, so questions and comments, Commissioner Neustadt.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with you about the credit application. That specific thing kind of jumped out at me, that seems a little shaky that we'd be asking for cash back for someone trying to apply for a credit for something we're asking them to do. I guess that goes to my other two questions. Because we have the data already in our GIS system, would there be a lot of administrative burden if a residential property came in and said, hey, I've got 2 rain barrels and, say, a gravel driveway? Would we be able to tell that, not the rain barrels necessarily, but the gravel driveway component for a credit from our GIS system?
We're well positioned with the way we already operate and maintain our GIS system to gather just about every information about impervious already.
Okay, so if we were to do a parcel by parcel measurement of single family residence, I know that does take some administrative time to do it, but can the GIS system handle that as well, or does it have to be a physical site?
No, in fact, the information you saw that Dave
Yeah, we have that
here tonight-
information. I can tell you every single parcel's actual down to the square footage, how much impervious they have, so we know it for everybody.
But how about pervious also?
Yes,
Do both?
we know both.
So you could do a pervious plus pervious
Yes.
measurement? Okay, and then I'm kind of focusing on the measurements here, but for the other parcels, the commercial, industrial, churches, schools and such, would those be measured with the impervious and the pervious, or just the impervious?
Just the impervious.
Okay,
Yep.
so that goes to the credit question, and we just kind of raised it at the end of Mayor Tully's comments about, as a village, when we say we have a PUD, we suggest, or actually say that you have to have detention, you have to have restricted flow out of your site, you have to have all these things that we tell you to do. It seems to me that to only give a 50% credit for something that we're mandating or legislating, for me, one guy would say that we might want to consider a bigger credit for some of the larger properties that we've asked to maintain store and control their own water until it can get into the system. That's kind of the whole goal of the restricted access and things. So that's just another comment that I'll have to think about, but I want folks to think about that.
Yeah, you could actually work that into your, into the PUD in some way if you wanted to.
Exactly. So, I think that's all the questions I have, just those couple of measurement deals. I think the tiered approach is probably a sensible one, but I know that there's parcels in town, and the manager and I have talked about this, where there's, side yards, there's all sorts of different ways where one property owner with 2 PIN numbers can actually have less runoff than, say, their neighbor. So I don't want to get too bogged down with, everybody lining up out the door here saying, well, I should get 5% off or 10% off because of my tiered value is 1, I think I should be at 0.75, so.
I just want to make something clear. We used the word parcel throughout the presentation tonight. That was just a labeling. The square footage we're talking about is the actual measured impervious area. So that issue in your example is already taken into consideration the way MFSG has put this system, for example, together.
Okay.
So that's already considered.
Great. That's all I had for tonight, Mayor. Thank you for another great presentation and for getting us the presentation so we can kind of watch it here and there and listen all at the same time.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Schnell?
A couple of things. One, the policy decision that we ultimately have to make, really, from my perspective, is whether or not we continue to put the burden on a segment of the population of Downsboro that actually uses the stormwater, or whether or not it becomes a user-type fee similar to water, similar to garbage, similar to other things, where people actually pay for their part of the responsibility of the system. And in this case, I think what the slides have shown us is that all municipalities that actually have stormwater utilities have put the burden across all segments, so there are really no exemptions. You either have it or you don't have it, but the exemptions really don't exist. I think that's a very important thing that we're going to have to look at from a policy point of view, because we either do it and don't have exemptions, or we just don't do it. Because once you start opening the crack, the water will flow, and literally and figuratively. So I think we need to be very careful as we deliberate this from a policy point of view. From my perspective, that's one of the things that we really have to, I guess, decide first, and then decide whether utility makes any sense. The other thing that I think we also have to decide from a policy point of view is, every time you say, well, maybe we could, with the PUD, and I agree, there are certain PUDs in our community that, they've gone up, they have lots of green space. The problem is, once you start doing more credits, then the cost gets spread more on other people. There's a fixed cost to all of this, depending on which one of the 3 you choose, but there is a fixed cost. So if you start doing credits, then all of a sudden that cost becomes more of a burden to another segment. And again, this is a policy decision that ultimately we will have to make, but I think we have to keep that in mind, that giving credit to one segment is going to put the burden on another segment. And I think if we make the credit system too burdensome or too cumbersome, all of a sudden everybody in the community is going to be asking for something. I mean, I have a rain barrel, I have my gutters going underground, I want a credit, and it means 42 cents. But, and that's being facetious, obviously, but I think we just need to be careful that the policy decision that ultimately make about credits is kind of fair to everybody. And I think that's what your presentation is showing us, is that 50 seems to be the break even. And I don't disagree that we shouldn't talk about it. I think we just need to be cognizant of the fact.
No, I think you're right, because the concept isn't that, somebody's going to game the system.
Right.
I think that the question is, we don't want to punish somebody and make them pay twice. So for example, if we required them to spend $1 million to put in this elaborate detention system, and then they got to pay on top of it, that might not be fair. I think, to your point, there ought to be, everybody ought to shoulder the burden.
Right.
But there may be both residential and commercial properties where they pay, but in a different way. And I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend I know every situation that would arise that would make sense, but we can imagine some where it would.
Well, and I think credits are fine. I think we just need to be careful how big a credit we allow.
Agreed.
And ultimately, that's a decision that the 7 of us if we decide to go with the stormwater utility, we'll have to make. I do have a question because I actually asked the village manager this, so my assumption is there would be other people who were doing this too. Under the fee structure with the single-family residential, you have the small parcel, medium parcel, and large parcel. When you say 1 to 2,500 square foot of impervious and 2,501, you're not talking the square footage of a house.
No.
You are,
Total impervious.
You're talking about driveways and sheds.
Sidewalks and roofs and-
all those wonderful things. So if someone's, sitting out there going, well, my house is only 1,600 square feet, that's not what you're talking about.
No.
So,
It's actual measurement on the parcel of sidewalks, driveways, roof, shed, anything that would be impervious.
okay.
Yep.
Okay, and I think that's an important
So
point to make.
most households are going to have a greater impervious than the square footage of their household.
And not public sidewalks, those are in the right of way.
Correct.
Service walks, service walks would be, with our language, what he's talking about.
We're not going to charge them for putting
Right.
sidewalks on there. Okay. No, I appreciate having had this earlier because it really was good to go over a couple of times at home. So, and great presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good job. I mean, ultimately, I think for the residents that are out there, when we have, after the fourth presentation, we're going to have, I think, many discussions up here. Plus, there will be an educational component, which I think I've said a million times, but there will be an educational component where this kind of, not dog and pony show, but an explanation of what we're talking about will be brought to the residents.
That's correct. Just a good time to mention this process. In the third meeting in October, we'll hear some recommendations from MFSG. The council may take a couple of weeks to think that over. And then we're not asking for a yes per se at that point. A yes would mean the council's directing staff to further look into it. If that's the case, it would launch probably a 90-day period of public outreach meetings with key stakeholders, allow us to get their feedback, and then come back to the council and start diving in to some of the details. However, in October, November of this year, if you've decided that this is something that we should not pursue, then we could stop the process around that time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Questions or comments, Commissioner Burnett?
Thank you, Mayor. It's pretty important to underscore, I think, what Marilyn said is in particular. That number, whatever it is, $6 million, it's the recommended level, is the number that we believe something approximate to that is what we need to maintain adequately our existing system. And not unlike what we saw with water a year ago, we're not doing it now. But the other thing that's important is that number is Marilyn said it, it's a number we're going to levy, so it's going to come from somewhere. So these offsetting credits or exemptions or whatever just shift the burden. But it also is never going down. That's not a number that's going to get, some sort of, it's unlikely to get some sort of Springfield adjustment to the amortization period. That number is going to go up next year, and the next year, and the next year.
You underestimate Springfield.
Yeah, probably so. But I think it's important that everybody sort of digest that. What that means is whether that's coming from property taxes as it's been, frankly, for a number of years, or whether it comes out of stormwater utility, it's a number that is going to continue to increase regardless of what we do. So we can have one village employee or 400, we can have this program or that. That burden is on us as a village to deal with. And so it's why we start every time we're talking about what is the most equitable way to try and split that up. Because it's here, it's going to stay, and it's going to grow. Those are things I think we know are going to happen. The thing that I think is in particular about this slide, and that one, number 29 as well, that's, I know the mayor hates them, and he's right, because it doesn't have anything to do with property values, but the big thing is that difference between that 640 number and that 1440 number. That's why we've got, in the analogy, that's why we've got 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is, of 14% water increases staring us in the face, because we got the exact same thing, and we're trying to handle it. And so these numbers are huge, scary, awkward, unsettling probably, but really important and necessary. And we're playing catch up. That's reality. We'll talk, as Marilyn said, lots and lots of times probably over the next 6 months on this thing if we go forward at all. But while I believe that this is an appropriate thing to do, and I think it's a logical approach, in my mind, it mimics very much garbage, it mimics very much water, the understanding that there's a base cost and it needs to be equitably shared by everybody. I still have a problem with the idea that we're going to do some of it with property tax and some of it not. I think that we ought to be doing this, but I also think we ought to be having an offsetting property tax change. What that means for us really is, in light of some of the LRFP meetings and things, that this isn't necessarily a new revenue source. This is a required revenue source for existing services. And that's a pretty big distinction that we're going to all have to sort out up here over the next several months. So, thanks.
Fisher Waldeck.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. We've been at stormwater utility for, what, a decade?
Just about.
We know that we have costs associated with when the rain comes down, and the idea is, everybody says, how are you going to pay for it? And way back when, it was, do we put it on the property taxes? And I appreciate the slides that basically says the residential folks are taking a hit. If you put it on the property taxes, you can deduct it on your from your other taxes, your federal taxes. However, is that enough to justify going, keeping it on property taxes and not a fee? And I don't think so. I think the slides pretty much show that in order to be equitable, it doesn't look like it's fair to do the property tax thing. I was going through, and I appreciate the mayor starting the conversation with the slides. But I was going through way up in your first slide. You were talking about the choices: impervious plus pervious, and total area. And it got me wondering, what's the difference between total area and impervious plus pervious? I mean, if you had them both together, you're 100%, right?
Yeah, it's
quasi-pervious.
It's a level of complexity. If you do, some people do impervious area plus a different factor for pervious area. So they'll say if your lot 75% pervious and 25% impervious, then you pay 1 ERU for the impervious part, and you pay a fraction of an ERU for the pervious part. Because the reality is that when you have a rain event, your grass doesn't absorb all the water. You still do get some runoff. So that's the, I think the city of Moline actually does that. But that's a step beyond impervious area only, which would add a level of complexity that most people don't want to.
Say that's sounds more like administrative nightmare, which is another problem I had with, and I think that technology has changed. The village manager is almost convincing me that we do have all this all set, and we don't have to send out troops 2 by 2 to visit everybody's backyard to see what they got.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned about starting the rain barrel police, though. I have a rain barrel. No, you don't. Yes, I do. It's connected. No, it isn't. Yes, it is.
That's not a rain barrel, it's a Dixie cup.
There you go. As a matter of fact, before we came out, I was asking about a deck. Is a deck pervious or impervious? I say, well, it's pervious, but your slats are only every few inches, and then the rain, whatever, drops down into what's definitely pervious. So it's almost like you should get a credit for a deck rather than the other way around. That could be argued. I mean, these are all things that need to be administratively addressed. Also, when it rains an inch in the north side of Downers Grove, it rains an inch on the south side of Downers Grove. And got me wondering about a watch meeting that was held years and years ago when somebody was talking about, when they had somebody from the county talking about stormwater, and they talked about the quality of our ground. It's clay. And I'm wondering how pervious we really are. So I got some grass growing. It's considered pervious, but it's only going down an inch or so before it runs off into the system anyway. So does it really matter based on the quality of our soil? Just a question, I don't know, does it really matter? Is there that much a difference?
I think the argument would be that the current structure of assessed value has no base whatsoever in terms of the potential impact, whereas as you move towards impervious, it's not perfect. I would absolutely agree with that, depending on the slope of your property, and, we can't measure it through a water meter, but it's much, much more equitable and realistic than the value of my property. That really has nothing to do with with how much stormwater I'm going to contribute. So it's moving in the right direction. Maybe as technology gets better, we'll be able to actually determine how much runoff's actually coming off, but it's moving in that direction, so that's the argument for it.
Next thing we'll have to do with the GIS is determine slope too.
That's right.
huh?
Eventually, we'll be able to
Goodness
determine exactly
gracious.
what house the runoff came from. There goes Waldek's runoff.
Everybody will have a different color, different chemical makeup or something.
Reminds me of that book, 1984.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking years ago. Let's see.
Thinking that now.
And I think to Commissioner Schnell's point, we are talking about, for example, business doing attraction and retention of business. It's important, that the thought is, when we try and bring business in, that they want exemptions from various things, and there has to be equity, and that if we give somebody an exemption, somebody else has to pick up the tab. Somebody's paying the tab for that. And, as the Commissioner said, we should have that conversation and determine that there should be absolutely no exemptions for that type of thing.
If I could follow there, I think there's a real important point there. If you do over time, if you do have people mitigating stormwater, eventually it does reduce costs. I mean, we do say, if you give a credit, somebody else is paying. Initially, that's true, but over time, as you handle your stormwater, more and more green roofs go in, more and more retention ponds, things of that sort go in. People change the way they develop. They put pervious pavement in. That does reduce the volume of flow that goes through the system, that ultimately reduces the stream stabilization that you have to do and things of that sort. So it's long-term, but it's not completely a zero-sum game in that sense.
Well, for that really to succeed, it would have to be a regional solution.
That's true.
Otherwise, we'd just be the big sponge for Darien and West Lawn and Woodridge.
Well, that's the credit conversation. I was just thinking of the business conversation. In other words, when I decided to move from Palatine to Downers Grove, nobody said, we're going to give you a tax cut if you move to Downers Grove because your bill, we want you to live here. However, we do that for business. We say, okay, we'll mitigate some fees and we'll do some of this. Okay, if you want to put in a stormwater situation, we can give you credits.
Yeah.
But, just because you're...
We'll have designer credits for you, though.
There we go. But, it's important that this be all done fair and square. So there's a lot of information here, and we'll just continue to look at it. Thank you.
Commissioner Rankin?
I just have a few questions. If we decided as a group to create a stormwater utility, what kind of staffing would we need to add? Is it, 10 people, 20 people?
Well, I think
Just curious.
if the council tells us to continue to pursue this, and then we go in that 90-day period, that's when we would address things like actual billing methodology, staffing impacts, that we could come back to you with a full picture of how it would affect not only...
You don't even want to spend the time and resources looking into that until you have some policy.
Right. I can say this, though. We are very well positioned for the administration of a system like this because of the technology we currently have in place and the staffing we currently have in place. So we'll get into that later if we are directed to do so.
Okay, and I agree with some of the other people on the dais about the credit application fee. I think that's just kind of hindering people from trying to do what we want them to do. And then one of the things that you said in this presentation, in the last presentation, that I thought was interesting is that we're on a 220-year replacement plan right now, and that's unacceptable. So we've got to figure out some sort of solution. Thanks.
Town's not even that old. Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple things. And these were questions that were actually addressed to me, and I wasn't able to answer, and maybe it's preliminary to get to it. But there are some homes that do not have sump pumps. What kind of impact would that have if you don't have a sump pump? Is there a credit for that? No credit? Does the GIS pick that up? Does it know that? Some residents have, because of the lots that they bought, have dry basins, stormwater retention, right? Yeah, retention on their properties where 99% of the time it's dry. How does that impact? I mean, is that do they get a credit for that, or? I mean, you know, these are just questions. And then last, as dumb as it sounds, so we're talking about decks and spacing. What happens if you have rock in your landscaping instead of mulch? Is that a penalty?
No, I mean, that would be a level of detail that the GIS does
The rock
not,
was always there?
the GIS would not pick up that that's
Prove that.
impervious.
How far back are we going? All right, and then in regards to what Commissioner Barnett had mentioned, you know, I would be in favor of discussing this further as long as we're going to look at doing a credit back to the property tax bill.
One last comment. since I'm jumping
And that's all I
around.
have.
No, then we're going to hear from the audience.
Here's an example for you that I'll give you that maybe we could get some information on what we would do with this particular parcel. It's an ongoing project over at North High. They just redid their fields. They've got a new synthetic turf field, parking lot, in-ground detention that they're going to end up using for gray water for watering ball fields. So that's going to be a lot of water stored, reused. I mean, it's just an example that in my mind might help me figure how we're going to calculate credits. I think you're right, Marilyn, about the exemptions. I'm not looking for exemptions, but I think that credits for a system like that is really advanced and far beyond what a regular kind of detention might be, is something that we have to give special attention to.
Yep.
Because it's exactly what we would want them to be doing with their property right now.
Yep.
So just an example, maybe something to consider.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are, you know, other utilities around the country as well as in the state of Illinois that have, you know, very detailed credit manuals and very not detailed credit manuals. Obviously, the more detailed, the more administrative burden. But I did want to mention the idea that the reason that most people set 30% at water volume control is because there are engineering analysis that say that you can only, during a certain rain event, you know, a 2-inch storm, you can only size something that would retain that amount of volume. So it's not completely arbitrary. There are hydraulic analysis that say, you know, most people design it for the 1-inch storm event. Yes, you can contain that, but once it's beyond that, so there's some rationales for why you would set those levels of what you do. And if you do some search on the internet, there's, you know, a huge range of credit programs, some that are very, it's not just credits, some offer grants and incentives so that they would actually fund somebody to put in a green roof out of the stormwater utility. And there's a whole host, once you move down this path, of good things that you can do. But you just have to be willing to you know, handle the administrative issues of it. We did factor in our financial modeling. We did assume some increased staff time. We assumed basically that you'd need about 1/2 person for a GIS at about, I think that we figured about $36,000 a year that you would need a GIS person, spend about half time looking at this, maintaining it. And then initially, as you set up the program, there would be some initial costs that would eventually go away, you know, once this is established. We did some research and asked those utilities in the state of Illinois that have a tiered versus an average ERU approach if they see more administrative burden, and they all said that they don't. That they don't have people coming in and say, hey, I want to go down to the smaller ERU. I really, you know, I'm right on that line, and they just don't experience that. So initially there will be some administrative issues, but if you talk to the vast majority, once you get it up and running, it's pretty minimal in terms of the effort, because it is impervious is a static thing, and once you establish that, get the credits program going, it's really not a huge administrative burden.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments on the latest installment of our exploration of a proposed stormwater utility from the audience perspective? Just a tribute to how informative the presentation was. Oh, you had to take me up on my challenge, didn't you? Please, come on down, Ms. Frigo.
Hi, Chris Frigo, 1918 Elmore Avenue. I guess I'll have more questions as it goes along, and I've been following the presentations and appreciate the thoroughness, but I guess my question is about the examples that were given of the communities that now are using stormwater utilities, what the comparables were. I was trying to relate them to our suburban community in terms of its development, past, present, and I guess future, having listened to the comp plan and long-range financial planning for the village and our goals. I found a hard time kind of relating Downers Grove to some of these communities in terms of looking at my own home saying, God, I bought this lot because it was higher and I wasn't going to be down low. And I don't know, I guess I just have some questions about looking at these communities, comparing them to our own for the utilities, and perhaps it's just a question of those that have it and those that don't.
You mean in terms of topography?
Just size, development, kind of community it is, existing things. I mean, I sat here in the audience thinking of my own home. I'm in the middle of a remodeling project. My timing couldn't be worse, I guess, in terms of decisions we're making or not making, or certainly want to look at in terms of being more green and improvements, but yeah, trying to make some equivalent there.
Yeah, the reason we selected these is because these are those utilities, those localities within the state of Illinois that have stormwater utilities. So these are those that currently have functioning stormwater fees. It was at least some source of the revenue in a separate enterprise fund.
So you just chose them because they're the only ones that have them in
Yes.
Illinois, that's all.
These are, okay.
I don't
But
think
there's-
any presentation for the IGFOA, and it was done, it was talking about other revenue streams that municipalities could look at. And Springfield was one of the towns that did a big presentation on this, and I actually talked to the village manager about it. Why weren't they part of this?
Do they have a functioning utility or a separate stormwater utility? I don't believe they
The
do.
way it came across, they did. I didn't have my notes with me. I just, figured they would be on the report. Can we
Yeah.
confirm that?
We'll definitely look into it. If they do, we'll add them. These are the ones that we know about that do.
We'll just double check, and I'll get what I will.
Yeah.
Just have to do my presentation, but.
There are about six other ones that are currently in various stages of forming utilities or examining them in the state of Illinois.
Are they up here in Illinois? I mean, something that would be comparable to Downers Grove, one of our surrounding communities? I mean, Tinley Park, we can relate to.
Well, I just want to interrupt there because, and first of all, did I answer your question, Chris, as to why those communities were on the list? Okay. But then the other question is, we're going to compare, because normally we do comparisons by population and
Yeah.
age and things, but what would be a good comparator for stormwater utility? That's why I said topography. I don't know what.
I mean, I know the village of Glenview is considering it.
It's
They're
impervious,
not.
it comes down to impervious area,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Well, and also how I mean, I forget what the breakdown is,
Typical lot size, percentage of residential
Yeah.
units.
Yeah, right, things like that.
and the topography and,
How old your storm tower is?
It's more directly related to the attributes of your stormwater system than it is the attributes of the rest of your physical environment.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that installment. That was very, very helpful. We have a lot of thinking to do and debating to do, as the saying goes.
And that is our first reading, right?
Chris has another question.
Yes, like all the other ones, they will be
Yeah.
online. And that ends our first reading.
Thank you very much. That brings us to thank you very much. That brings us to item 9 on the agenda, the mayor's report. And I do have a few things that I'd like to do. Why don't I do this one first, because it was very appropriate for tonight. I have a proclamation. It's very appropriate tonight because we adopted our comprehensive plan. It's the first one in 46 years. proclamation is with respect to recognizing Community Planning Month, and I'll warn Mr. Dave Reiner in advance that I'm going to ask him to come down here so I can give it to him, because you've been sitting out there way too long. Whereas change is constant and affects all communities, whereas community planning plans can help manage this change in a way that provides better choices for how people work and live, and whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community, and whereas the benefits of planning require public officials and citizens who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation, and whereas the month of October is designated as National Community Planning Month throughout the United States and its territories, and whereas we recognize that many valuable contributions made by professional community and regional planners of the Village of Downers Grove, and extend our heartfelt thanks for the continued commitment to public service by these professionals. Now therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2011 as Community Planning Month in the Village of Downers Grove, in conjunction with the celebration of National Community Planning Month. Of course, every month is Good Planning Month here in the Village of Downers Grove, but this month we celebrate it. So Mr. Dave Reiner, as our Chief Planning Guru. Watch yourself, Southside. Let me hand that to you and say thank you for everything that you and your department do to keep us ahead of the curve when it comes to good planning. Thank you. All right, a few more items. As everyone knows, we have made a commitment as a council to continue keeping ComEd electrical reliability in the Village of Downers Grove a top priority, and I wanted to report, as we have indicated we would, in terms of where we're at. Folks will recall we had a town hall meeting, a very well-attended town hall meeting, where we had a number of senior executives from Commonwealth Edison come out and hear your concerns and hear our concerns, and they made a number of commitments of things that they were going to do going forward to both improve their responsiveness to our residents and also improve the reliability of the system. As of today, and it's coming up on almost a month since the September 15th town hall meeting, we had asked them to demonstrate to us and show us within about 30 days of that meeting what they would do and what they were going to do in the future. So far what they have done is that they have investigated each of the concerns that were raised at the meeting by residents and those who made presentations. ComEd has contacted the majority of residents who raised specific concerns at that meeting. If anyone within the sound of my voice has not heard back from ComEd, please let us know, because we will follow up. And as I said, they have contacted the majority. They have not said they've contacted everyone. So they are apparently still in the process of doing that. But if you've not heard from them and you gave your name and address at the town hall meeting, please let us know. Next, they have provided a plan for addressing most of the concerns that ComEd felt were actionable. We are continuing to work with them on that, because there's obviously some differences of opinion as to what a plan is, what is addressing, and what we think and what they think. But we're continuing to work towards that, but they have provided us with a plan of what they're willing to do. And ComEd has also provided an explanation for not addressing some of the concerns that were raised, and we will continue to follow up on those, particularly with respect to the ones that we think should continue to be followed up on. In terms of a time frame, Commonwealth Edison has provided us with a time frame for the reliability improvements that they have agreed to make thus far. And those fall into two categories principally. And I'll just have to speak generally, because otherwise we'd be here all night if I got into all the details. One would be targeted tree trimming efforts will be completed by the end of the first quarter of 2012. And second, the mechanical and equipment repairs that they have identified that they are willing to do will be completed by the summer of 2012. A document listing the concerns that were raised at the town hall meeting and the corresponding response from ComEd has, as I speak, been posted on the village's website. But we do not consider this to be closed. We do not consider this to be over. We consider this to be another step in the right direction, and we will continue to follow up and work with Commonwealth Edison to make the improvements necessary to enhance electrical reliability in the Village of Downers Grove. Any questions of any members of the council on that point? Otherwise, we'll continue to keep reporting out on this as we have additional steps forward to report on. Thank you. Well, the next item I'd like to touch upon is to thank everyone, all 4 of the determined stalwarts who came out to our October 1st budget meeting. We held that at station number 2, covered a lot of ground, had a very good conversation about the fiscal 2012 budget for the Village of Downers Grove, and given that we were only talking about $130 million, it's kind of important. We will have further meetings since we did not conclude our conversations, and there is a schedule of which we will continue to discuss how we will fund both operating and capital issues here in Downers Grove, and again, as always, invite members of the public to engage, communicate, and give us their input in terms of what they think is important as part of that budget process. Last, I have mentioned in the past that the DuPage County, and particularly the DuPage County Stormwater Committee, is working on a new stormwater ordinance. We talked a lot about stormwater tonight. Well, there's also a new ordinance that has been proposed, and it's been through a number of different iterations. There was a meeting of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference on, I believe it was, it was on the 26th, thank you, Commissioner Rentgen, of September. And it was a forum by which municipal representatives were invited to come out and comment to members of the Stormwater Committee as well as DuPage County Stormwater staff on that proposed ordinance. I sit on that committee but was aware of this, but also was curious as to, I sit on that committee as a municipal representative, of which there are a number. But I was also very curious as to what other municipalities who do not have representation on the DuPage County Stormwater Committee might have said or have raised as questions with respect to the ordinance, because obviously we're as interested in what our neighbors have to think on that as we are. You know, sometimes they have good ideas too. I was unable to attend due to another commitment, but Commissioner Rentgen was kind enough to attend in my stead, and I know there wasn't anything too exciting to report, but if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to share with us your take on that meeting, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Well, there was a lot of individuals that work in stormwater, so there was some very specific questions. Mike Millette from the village was there as well. All in all, the impression I had was that people were happy that this second draft was going through and some of the changes they made. Like I said, very specific questions that were a little out of my league, but the people that were involved were very, interested in the answers. The one thing that they were talking about is when you have a floodplain and you're deciding where to put your roadway, some of the folks were asking to not have to do an analysis of all the options because that's such a big cost. They said, of course, we're going to pick the option that has the least impact on the floodplain because we're in stormwater management. But that was about it. I mean, a lot of very detailed questions from the people that work in that environment, but from a municipal level, quiet.
So the good news is next week's agenda will have an opportunity for the council to comment on the proposed ordinance. It has now made its way through our Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee. We will summarize the issues in a way that are non-technical but are more policy-based for everybody to take a look at here next week.
Well, thank you, and that's perfect timing, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to have the benefit of what some of our neighbors may or may not be saying about it. And that, what you reported, Commissioner, is consistent with my understanding, is that overall, both the county and municipal representatives are receiving the new proposed ordinance well and viewing it as a substantial improvement over the old one. And I think we'll have lots of different components that I think we would welcome, but it sounds like we're going to get a good presentation on that coming up pretty soon, and also looking forward to what our own Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Commission members have to say about it. So thank you, Commissioner, for attending that meeting. That's all I have under the mayor's report. That would bring us to agenda item 10, the manager's report.
One item to report out on, good news, the ladder truck that the council authorized the purchase of a few months ago is here. It's actually on site at Fire Station number 2. You may recall that this is an essential apparatus in our fire fleet because it is used for all 3 primary firefighting tasks, including search and rescue, ventilation, and suppression. There's a picture of this key apparatus right there. You may also recall that it was a manufacturer-designed apparatus that meets all of the needs of the village of Downers Grove. It will be placed in service in about 2 to 3 weeks after we outfit it with the proper tools and train all of our staff on how to use this apparatus. So 2 to 3 weeks, you should see this out responding to fire and EMS calls. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you. And those who were, that made it out to the budget meeting on October 1st got a sneak peek and an opportunity to walk around and look at the truck, and it does have that new fire truck smell, that's for sure. Thank you for that report out in the picture. It's a handsome piece of equipment, but I think, all levity aside, the fact that we got it for a very, very good price is great appreciated.
Not cheap.
Not cheap, not cheap.
Not cheap.
Very reasonable.
Can we resell it? Make some money?
And we wouldn't have a ladder truck.
Yeah.
That brings us to item 11, attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Only 2 items to present tonight. The first one is an ordinance amending the on and off premise consumption license for the PO2 liquor licenses, and the second is an ordinance creating a bring your own liquor license classification.
Thank you very
That is
much,
all.
Ms. Petrarca. That brings us to item 12, councilman reports and new business. Commissioner Newstat.
Can you believe it? I don't have anything tonight.
Commissioner Rankin.
No.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Oh, I'll ruin the record here. Let's see, the question, next week on the agenda, we're going to be talking about the budget.
Yes.
Is that going to be, are we going to be up here, or are we going to be in the committee room as we are accustomed to be?
We had planned to do it as part of the normal meeting right here and the dais. I'm open to any suggestions.
Okay, just wondering how that worked, and I encourage everybody to come. It was rather disappointing, well, I thought we had more than 4 people, but anyway, please come and provide us your input. I'll go in a little bit more detail next week on this, but October 16th is the annual crop walk in Downers Grove, the South DuPage Crop Walk. They will be at Gloria Dei, leaving, they gather about 1:30, they step off is at 2. Contributions, I suggest it's a hunger walk to fight hunger around the world and locally as well. If you want to make a contribution, please check with your church or school and see who the coordinator is. If you don't know, send me an email and I'll get you the name of the proper coordinator for that. More details on that next week. 25% of all the money raised in the walk does stay local, and that's important. The local charities or local organizations that receive funding is the Food Depository, Fish, the PADS locations, and this year for the first time is the program Meals on Wheels. Very happy that they added that organization or that program. They will be funneling that money through the Senior Citizens Council. It goes to the Meals on Wheels program, and it will be designated to stay in South DuPage. So if you're so interested, there's a real need out there. So October 16th is the date of that. And Mayor, when we were talking about the ComEd conference that we had last time, I neglected and I meant to congratulate you. I know staff put in a lot of work on it, but I know you have you spearheaded it, you monitored it very well, and I thought you at least deserve some credit for that. So thank you for that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Commissioner Barnett.
I have nothing, Mayor.
Commissioner Durkin.
I have 2 items. One of them rolls right into what, one of the topics that Commissioner Waldeck just talked about. This morning I had the opportunity to attend, just like we all did, but I chose to attend the Chamber of Commerce's non-for-profit segment, chapter, if you want to call it that, breakfast. And they had a guest speaker, and the guest speaker was Jared Payton. And I know I'm a Packer fan, and he's actually a good kid. He's younger than me. He's going to be a new dad, so it was a good conversation there. But the point is that he talked about the importance of giving back to the community and getting involved, and with what Commissioner Waldeck spoke about. I encourage my colleagues and other residents, if you have the opportunity to attend any of these events, it's rather warming because you get to see and meet all the other nonprofits that make up Downers Grove and to touch the community as a whole. So my hat's off to Laura Crawford for putting that segment of the chamber together. It does meet only 10 times a year, and it does have different speakers, and I wouldn't say you have to go to all of them, but if you get a chance and you can, I highly encourage you to do that. I also had the opportunity to meet and have lunch with our new director of the library here, Rick Ashton, and I told him that I encouraged him to reach out to all of you to have a chance to meet with him, knowing how important you may have already, but as of the time I had lunch with him, how important the library is in our community, and it's such a strong impact on the community as a whole. I know that following my lunch, he was already having a meeting with Manager Fieldman and others, so if you haven't had a chance to say hello, please do so. He brings a lot of knowledge to our community, especially after serving for, I think the number was 6 mayors for the city of Denver. So when we were talking about the library and the changes and what he would like to see or what he would like to do as the director of the library, it was rather interesting. His comment was, I always took marching orders from the mayors of Denver. Here I get a board in the community and blah, blah, blah. So it was rather interesting, his perspective. But the changes and the ideas that they have over there, I know that they're really not part of us, but they are type thing. But it was well rewarding, and hopefully we can get him before the council sometime.
Yeah, speaking of that, given that he's now had an opportunity to settle in, which I think
6 weeks.
anyone deserves to get settled in,
Yeah.
perhaps we can extend an invitation to have him come to one of our meetings and we can introduce him to the community, show him how nice we are when people come to the podium.
Will do, Mayor.
And allow him to maybe speak a little bit about what he has in mind. I think it's the first new library director in many people's memory, and I think it would be a nice gesture if we extended that invitation.
And the last comment I have in regards to next week's meeting regarding the budget, I would highly encourage that we do it here for the simple fact that we can televise it, and those that don't necessarily come can see what's going on with the budget. So,
Thank you.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Schnell.
Just one comment, Helping Girls Navigate Adolescence Annual Pancake Breakfast is going to be held October 22nd at Belly Doyle's, beginning at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's always a great affair, and I would encourage people to attend. It's the same day as the painting of the windows that the Rotary holds, so go out, paint windows, and go have breakfast and help a great cause.
Thank you. October 16th. Wow. I think I
You said
should.
it.
No, I was changing the subject.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I was going to say October 16th, I'm half tempted to declare an exercise day in the community because in addition to the crop walk, that very same day is also the Running with the Leopards, the Leicester School 5K. And of course, it's also the annual Run for Her Life 5K walk run that Family Shelter Services, which has a location here in Downers Grove, runs every year. And that's another great race that takes place, starts at Downers Grove North and ends at Downers Grove North. And, I don't know, I'm glad you didn't ask me to also do the crop walk, because I'm already doing the 5K Family Shelters and running across town to run the Leicester 5K. And you might have to call it the crop drag if I were to come to that
crawl.
Yeah, it would be a crawl, but a lot of different opportunities to get out and exercise in Downers Grove on October 16th, and all for good causes. That's all I had, so with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.